Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, for Kate Malinsky, this experience you will soon learn about will remain forever indelibly imprinted on her mind. For it was to be a night of drama, where embroiled in the dusky twilight, like the twinkling silvery stars of the heavens, was a kaleidoscope of sparkling emotions, ranging from the dullness of nervous anxiety, trepidation, uncertainty, to the bright gleaming star of excitement, along with the two most powerful stars of all, wonder and astonishment. These varied flavours of emotion were to become the quintessential ingredients that night, serendipitously blended and thrown together to create a marvellously distinguished, imperishable red-letter evening that Kate Malinsky would never ever forget as long as she lived. To date, all these years later, Kate might take a pause for a moment, draw in a deep breath of soulful reflection, ask herself, did that really happen? Yet she will be the first to unequivocally assure you that it most certainly did. When the curtains roll back on the stage of her life, you too will also be forced to draw in a breath of wonderment, for you will be equally as enchanted by her story, that will lead you to believe that there are definitely angels among us. Who would have ever thought that such a normal, routine, regular night in Banff would roll forward so presumptuously, with a drama of the humankind, engaging actors, a stage, an audience, finished by a bountiful appreciative applause from the satisfactorily entertained. Yet for Kate and her brother, that night had not ended, not by a long shot. A drama of their own making was on the precipice of being birthed, which invited two outlandish, unassuming characters on board the stage of their lives that they would never have envisaged or anticipated in their wildest dreams or imaginings. So on with our noteworthy story, before you can bear the suspense no longer. Kate had solicitously prepared the selected occasion, on behalf of the Family Bereavement Society, for people who were suffering from the fortuitous, unforeseen death of a beloved one, taken from them far too soon. It was to raise money for those struggling to pick up the pieces of their lives again, after such a dreadful event that had torn their lives so viciously apart, like the paper in a paper shredder. These unfortunate people required help during those blistering austere months after a devastating tragedy, where financial and emotional help was so often required, as well as lengthy intensive counselling sessions encouraged with a skilled therapist, to bring about solace and acceptance to the broken of heart. The theatrical production was being hosted in Banff Avenue, on the corner of Banff and Wolf Street, in the pretty beguiling town of Banff, located amidst the prepossessing striking views of Alberta's Rocky Mountains that rise up into the sky in their swanky imperial majesty and deportment. Proud and tall, they saunter up pompously into the heavens, arresting the views of this charming, prepossessing small town, cradling it with their mighty, sculptural, powerful hands that will quite literally take your breath away, as they will surely beguile you with their transfixing allure. For even blind people who have visited our town claim to have felt its magnetic pulling beauty, while the hard of hearing believe that the music of this place has quite literally filtered through their ears. Let's just say this town's rustic traditions and historic heritage are heightened and enhanced by the endorsement of wholesome, natural building materials, predominantly the use of stone and wood, reflected in the architecture and typically seen all over the town. It is reminiscent of a town you might see in the Swiss Alps or in a box of Swiss chocolates, as pretty as a picture. Banff is one of the most beautiful towns on the entire planet, without question. A dreamy, romantic place, like a beautiful poem that rolls off your tongue so eloquently, or an undulating, tuneful melody that pulls at your heartstrings like the strings of a church bell, tumbling through town with a seamless musical flow. Reminiscent of the pretty flowers that cascade over the large flower barrels in town, that plough even more jewelled beauty into this place, if that were at all possible. Truly, it doesn't get better than this. Let's just say this twinkling town, with its eclectic shops, boutiques, fabulous eateries, and avant-garde coffee shops, bobs up against the resplendent mountains like a gleaming diamond. These magical mountains have witnessed so much over the centuries, too much to comprehend. They carry in their sturdy, powerful proportions, unyielding foundations, and deep depths, clandestine secrets from generations long past. They wear the history of this place like a mother-of-pearl overcoat that sweeps over rugged contours, voluptuous sturdy bedrock that towers into the heavens with a magisterial grace and glitters under the cobalt blue sky. The town is situated about 112 miles west of Calgary and is magnanimously flanked by the awe-inspiring mountains of Mount Rundle, Sulphur Mountain, Mount Norquay, and Cascade Mountain. When it came to the play being hosted that auspicious night, locals and visitors alike to Banff were naturally welcomed and invited to see the production that was being held at St. Paul's Presbyterian Church, built from stone, established in 1887 by Scottish railway workers who were desirous to worship in a Presbyterian church, and hence St. Paul's Presbyterian Church came into being, a proud prominent landmark among many others here in Banff, illustriously gilded with the influences of a rich, vibrant history behind it. Kate Malinsky was not only producing, but playing a quintessential leading part, complemented by other teenagers from Banff Community High School. It would seem all in town had been informed about the precociously talented teenagers who were performing a surprise modern interpretation of Agatha Christie's acclaimed production for $8 a ticket, to be presented on several nights during the next month, as the audiences could not be too large. There were posters strewn about town, alerting people's attention to this must-see play. It had been Kate's ingenious idea to produce and star in this play, as her best friend Doris Macy had sadly lost her sister in a hit-and-run accident over a year prior, and Kate was desperate to contribute towards the bereavement fund to help similar grieving families in the future overcome the tortured unfairness of their grief that had swept into their lives like an unwelcome, unexpected tornado. On that fateful early evening of the inauspicious calamitous day in question, that brought about Kate's incessant, earnest need to help the bereavement fund, let's just say a seemingly benign morning, morphed into a cruel, uncongenial evening, when a family's life was so savagely ruined by a headstrong 16-year-old German teenager from Attenberg, Saxony. The willful young teenager had been visiting the town of Banff with his parents to enjoy the privileges of what this part of the world offers so generously to their guests from all parts of the world, who come here to enjoy the turquoise lakes, the majestic mountains, the vibrant wildlife, the fantastic hiking opportunities, and so much more, of course. It would seem that the unruly, refractory teenager was hankering after a bit of fun. He surreptitiously pinched his parents' rental car, unbeknown to them, He had driven like a bat out of hell through town, with no regard for the local townfolk that were hanging around the place in the early evening, many having visited local restaurants for a bite to eat. What possessed the young teenager to drive like a demented maniac and perform such outrageous stunts is anyone's guess. Yet it was later established he was an all-time fan of the 7-times world champion Michael Schumacher, who is one of the world's fastest drivers. Ostensibly, the teenager had idolized Michael Schumacher's success. He hung posters on the wall of his bedroom of his hero that smiled down on him every waking moment when he went to bed and rose up early in the morning. Let's just say, with so much in-your-face reminders of Michael Schumacher on his walls every day, the teenager possibly thought of little else than following in his idol's footsteps. Perhaps he saw himself one day driving like the speed of light. Well, almost. Many who witnessed the deadly scene that dreadful evening wore agog expressions on their faces, as if someone had just flung a bucket of ice-cold water over their heads. It was so surreal. No one could believe that this was actually happening. Indeed, the events moved by so fast, like a ball of wool on your grandmother's lap, falling, unrolling, gliding across the floor in one long stringy trail. It can't be stopped in time. There's no backtracking, no undoing this event. It has to be played out like that wool. Only time cannot be rolled back on this particular occasion. As we all know, it doesn't work like that. The car angrily lunged through the town at an outrageous, preposterous, unforgiving speed, making a high-pitched squeaking and jerking sound, screaming under the extreme painful exertion and pressure of driving at its maximum speed and capacity. As it neared its vicious, thunderous, malicious, predatory approach, people spontaneously cradled their hands over mouths, as a scene from their worst nightmares unfolded before their very eyes. It turned out that the German teenager, Barrett Schneider, had been inebriated after stealing a large bottle of his father's vodka. He had been inspired surreptitiously to take a joyride while his parents were snoozing, fancying himself as becoming like his idol. It was at the precise inopportune moment Doris's sister had stepped out onto the pavement to cross the road, and had no time to retreat back on her footsteps, as the rude, obnoxious rental car rocketed across the road at a speed that was hard to fathom. The car rumbled, shrieked, screamed and moaned. Its rubber tires knocked over the young girl, slashing and gliding over her torso. She was killed instantly, lay squashed in the road like a dead animal. One bystander had reported the drunken teenager, who was later arrested, climbing out of his truck speedily. On seeing the graphic, gruesome scene of carnage upon the road, he began to laugh and laugh, his laughter almost morphing into a witch's cackle. His body almost doubling over from amusement, as if the whole event was also terribly funny. The townsfolk were soon to learn that in traumatic situations, some people offensively laugh in response to such a dreadful calamity. It's the natural way for them of diffusing the horror of witnessing such a macabre scene. It had been anything but funny. But let's just say people always react to trauma differently, so we can't judge them for that. Kate had observed firsthand an entire family torn apart by the devastating, shattering news of a daughter or sister's fortuitous demise. Kate and Doris had been best friends, so she was closely acquainted with the Maisleys, who were like family to her. Doris's father, Peter Maisley, sank into such a deep despair. He couldn't return to work for quite some time, as it was all he could do to even get out of bed in the morning. He had lost his will to live. Losing his beloved daughter very nearly sucked the life out of his soul. It would seem his life had become a wavering struggle of just getting through the next 24 hours, one step at a time, while his wife Philippa had completely crumbled like a dilapidated ancient wall on very shaky foundations that begins to fold over, as if groaning in a hopelessness that seems to invite falling apart. For Philippa, sandwiching her life stoically together, had become pointlessly hard, almost futile. Doris had battled with her parents' grief, and of course the loss of her sister, which burdened her own melancholia all the more, so that she wore the weight on her shoulders, which was not easy for a 16-year-old girl to endure. Kate and her family had stepped in to buy groceries for the family, to cook meals, and organise for a counsellor to attend to the family's emotional needs. It would seem that Kate's family's kindness paid off in leaps and bounds. An entire year later, the family was now thriving, like a perennial flower that against all the odds had pushed itself through the adversity, through the hard, stony, unforgiving ground, to embrace another season. The Maisley family had triumphantly weathered the storm of their own grief, flourishing in the best way they possibly could. Of course, their lives would never be the same again, but they could move forward and make the best of each day, as despite the desolation they felt, they knew that life was a rich tapestry that should be lived and enjoyed, every moment appreciated. It was after this tragic event that Kate had taken it upon herself to present Agatha Christie's favourite 1953 long-revered play, witness for the prosecution. Kate had chosen to play the part of Romaine Vole, the wife of the accused. Kate's account. Let's just say I was excited about performing tonight. I loved acting, but I was filled with butterflies flapping around my belly, so that every part of me was wobbling with anticipation and nervous energy. I told myself firmly to keep it together. I knew that if I began to tremble in front of the other actors that I'd recruited for this play from my school, it would only influence them negatively. I had to lead by my example, but it was difficult to maintain a steady calm. Even my teeth were chattering as doubtful reservations began to creep into my head, like, what if you forget your words? What if you break out in a nervous sweat? What if you just can't perform? Let's just say that the most terrifying thought of all for me was getting stage fright. The makeup artist was layering my fair skin with makeup, stroking her badger's hair powder brush across my face. The gentle stroking brush movements calmed my agitation. She grinned at me brightly, showing off a pair of perfect white teeth. I'm so glad to be helping tonight. It's a real honour for me to play my part. But of course you're the real hero, organising this play to help the bereavement fund. It's such a fabulous idea. Are you nervous? A little, I say, doing my level best to look as nonchalant and apathetic as possible. But the reality is that within me, my insides are swarming like a hive of frenzied bees. In the beginning, doing this play had seemed like such a great idea. At first, that is. But in the cold light of day, I'm beginning to seriously harness a great deal of doubt. Was this a crazy idea or what? What if I just cannot pull this off? A reprimanding, stern voice within my gut reminds me that this play has been produced for a very good reason. And if it was all to go horribly wrong, tonight, let's just say, and there was egg left all over my face from my failure, who could possibly begrudge the money spent on this play being donated to such a worthy cause? The makeup artist attends to the other actors' faces, sweeping the large brushes of makeup over the contours of their skin with a professional proficiency. The dramatic effects of her fastidious work mean that our faces on stage will not look washed out or pale. My co-actors are looking up at me for some soothing, reassuring words to nurture and calm their doubts, as they are apprehensive of what the night might actually hold for them, and clearly entertaining in their minds similar uncertainties to my own. The difference is I cannot show mine to them. I have to pretend I'm as cool as a cucumber, which I certainly am not. It's all going to be absolutely fine, I assure them. Take in a deep breath now. I'm now acting in front of my friends, in order for my mock confidence to give them the strength they're craving. But they have little comprehension of the mushed-up state of my own insides. I'm quite literally squirming like an octopus at the end of a fisherman's spear. And right now, if I had the choice, I'd run far away from the stage and get the hell out of this church. I would if I could, but it's too late, so I'm resigned to my plight, whether I like it or not. I have to do this to the very best of my ability. In a trice my heart is pounding, every muscle in my jaw clenching. My chest feels so tight, it steals my breath. I'm telling myself in no uncertain terms to get a grip, to hold it together. I remind myself that some people perform in front of audiences all over the world, of millions of people, in music stadiums, like Celine Dion or Adele. If they can do it, so can I. I can hear my father's deep voice outside the drawn velvety navy curtains of the stage, addressing the audience as the time moves shockingly closer for my grand entrance. My whole body withers like a thirsty wildflower. I feel deflated. First, I would like to thank St. Paul's Presbyterian Church for allowing us to do our play here this evening, for what I believe is a very worthwhile cause, as those suffering a fortuitous bereavement are always in need of help financially and emotionally in grievous times such as this. The Bereavement Fund would appreciate your invaluable help, and if any of you feel tonight like dipping into your pockets ever deeper with more charitable donations, we would be very obliged. If you are not from Banff and are visiting and as an outsider, we would like to graciously welcome you to our very special town. Your contributions to our worthy cause will be very much appreciated. I am very proud of my daughter Kate, who is passionate about this enterprise. It was indeed her decision to modernize an Agatha Christie play for tonight's performance, to honor the precious memory of a young lady, 14-year-old Tasha Maisley, who was mown down by a car in our town a year ago, by a German teenager taking a joyride in his parents' rental car. A dreadful accident by all accounts. So without further ado, let us start the ball rolling.
The whole audience collapses into cheers and claps. Before I know it, the velvety blue curtain rolls back. I make my way cautiously onto the stage, my feet sliding across the cold wooden deck of the platform in the smart black court shoes I'm wearing, as if an unseen force is propelling me ever forwards. My heart is galloping in my chest, like wild horses gallivanting across an open prairie. I glance out at the intimidating sea of faces in the audience, where every unflinching eye is pinned directly on me. I feel as conspicuous as an ant, being viewed under a microscope. It's an uncomfortable feeling. I'm wearing a no-nonsense black pencil skirt, a white blouse and jacket, with my black hair swept back in a sleek top, with a scarf tied behind the hilly roll, in a headband, while cascading curls tumble down one side of my face. I'm wearing perfectly accentuated red lips, with pronounced black eyeliner, highlighting my grey-blue eyes, so typical of the 50s era. The sound of silence is electric. Not a soul in the audience makes a noise. There is no rustling of paper, or even a cough which might actually be rather welcome at this moment, as just stealing the attention away from me for just a second would be nice. I wish someone would cough to cause a wee bit of distraction. It might ease the tension a wee bit. I observe my mother sitting in the front row of chairs, her hand clasped in an anxious prayer-like position, as she waits in bated trepidation for my very first words to bounce off from the stage across to the audience like a rubber ball. My father is sitting there, his two hands placed firmly on either side of him, pressing down on the firm foundation of the upholstered padding, his upper shoulders and chest eagerly bent forward in urgent anticipation. I can see his nose is twitching, his eyes fixed stoically on me. They reflect an empathetic understanding of my uneasiness, but at the same time, a resolute faith in me. My 24-year-old brother is grinning at me from ear to ear, so brightly, like the sunshine on a rainy day. He has his right hand pinned up in a thumbs-up position, as if to say to me, "You go, girl. I believe in you. I know you can do it." I'm encouraged by their extreme faith in me. The first words that come out of my mouth flow as smoothly as a sea breeze, and with the animated faces in the audience turning up into delighted grins, my fear rides away like an ocean ferry on the Atlantic,
while confidence swoops down on me like a majestic eagle from the heavens, carrying me up in talons, infusing me with an assertive courage that helps encourage the other actors to follow in my example. Yes, I say to the audience, Leonard Vole is my husband. I'm his wife. He's been accused of the murder of a very wealthy old lady. I'm going to step in as a witness for the defence. I'm going to discredit my husband. I'm going to undermine his integrity, but for a very, very good reason. I fully intend to fabricate such audaciously bizarre evidence to use against him in order to undermine my own account, my own credibility. Do you see where I'm going with this? I'm going to skillfully lay down ludicrously preposterous allegations. Allegations that are so outrageous that no sane-thinking adult would believe a word of it. People will believe that I'm vindictively conspiring against my husband to hasten his conviction, that I have an axe to grind with him, that I want him brutally punished. This cunning way, ladies and gentlemen, I shall successfully improve my husband's chances of acquittal. There are many that will despise my surreptitious misleading claims against him. They will leap to his defence, for they will see him as unfairly wronged, falsely accused. They will be drawn to favouring him in every single regard. But no one will know. I planned this all along, so that my husband will be rescued from these accusations that are laid against him. Every husband needs a wife like me, that can deliver him so sagaciously from all his troubles. The audience claps and cheers. The play bobs along steadily, like a boat sailing along a smooth expanse of ocean, without a choppy wave in sight. By all accounts, it's a phenomenal success, with people cheering and complimenting us on a remarkable performance that I even know was incredibly good. "My darling, you were marvellous," says my mother, giving me a huge encouraging hug, followed by my father, who throws me up in his arms like an orca whale flipping up a seal in the air. He's beaming with pride from ear to ear, as if he can't believe a daughter of his performed like a star tonight, and he's pinching himself in his revelry. "You're a natural actress," Katie pipes. "I knew you could do it. I knew you could. Some of those stars in Hollywood would do well to learn from your example. I felt every one of your emotions. I even had goosebumps on my flesh," he says, rubbing his hands across his arms to demonstrate this fact. "Everyone I've spoken to says you're the kind of true talent that rarely ought to be gracing the red carpets of Hollywood." After the performance and all the adrenaline being pumped into my bloodstream, let's just say I'm not ready to settle down, not yet, to return home to a good night's sleep. I mean, come on! How can I, after such a fabulously sizzling night that has spiked my adrenaline, which is now currently shooting up to the stars? I'm grinning from ear to ear, and am feeling enervated like an excitable kid that has been on the roller coaster and wants to ride it all over again, or at the very least relive the experience by sharing it with someone else. And my brother's company will do very nicely for the job. He's always a willing listener, and by the look on his face now, he's as proud as Punch, and would quite literally do almost anything for me. As I was saying, my 24-year-old brother Baron has always been a fabulous listener, a thoughtful, generous type. He brought me some champagne and snacks, and I'm starving. I haven't eaten a thing all day, as like a bride on her wedding, nervous energy keeps the hunger pangs at bay. But now my hunger has come rolling in like the high tide. "I thought we could go for a drive tonight," he says. "We could go somewhere off the beaten track, sit under the stars, celebrate together, with champagne and snacks. I'm driving, so I'll be drinking the fizzy grape juice. But you, sis, you can have all the champagne. I'm proud of you," he says, giving me a huge hug. "Your performance tonight was electric." "You're taking Kate for a drive, are you?" says my father, "to celebrate under the stars? What a marvellous, marvellous idea! How thoughtful of you, Baron, and so typical of you. Me and your mother would love to be joining you both, but we're exhausted, worn out from the wearing anticipation we felt all day. I think the moment our heads hit the pillow, we will fall fast asleep. But you kids, with all your energy, you go and celebrate, for you've got young blood, and the night is still young. And quite frankly, I don't care if your sister is only 16. She definitely deserves some champagne for that bedazzling performance." "Where are you going to take me?" I asked my brother. "Not sure. I thought we could drive around the countryside, find a nice remote spot under the stars to have a midnight picnic together. I've brought along some battery-operated lights and torches, along with your windbreaker, in case you need it. It could be quite choppy out there." "Thanks, Baron. You think of everything. You're the best brother ever. The last thing I want to do is go to sleep. I want to bask in the thrill and afterglow of the entire evening. It feels good to be up on that stage, but coming down to earth after a huge high is not easy. I feel on top of the world right now. The play was such a dazzling success, far more than I ever envisaged." "Well, you were a natural, sis. Dad was right. Your talent could outrival many of Hollywood's elite. You should be very proud of yourself." "Thanks, Baron. It's kind of you to say, but I believe you're exceedingly biased, but I love you for it anyway." "I may be prejudiced, I admit, as far as you're concerned, but never was a truer word ever spoken from the heart. I mean it, sis. You're a star." I had changed into my tracksuit after the performance and was wearing a pair of sneakers, so I was kitted out to enjoy some champagne under the stars, and excited about talking to my brother about everything that had transpired that evening, and to get his opinion on the performances and his impression of it. Baron had put on some classical music, while his truck cautiously rolled down some rather precarious ancient roads that were far off the beaten track, that even in the cold light of day would almost certainly have subdued the venturesome types who would wisely give those roads a miss. But not for me or my brother. Let's just say there was a brazen, valiant, almost impertinent confidence that infected the both of us, with a cocky boldness that in normal circumstances we would never normally have indulged. But not tonight. Everything tonight was different. It was like we could conquer the entire world, rise above it all. For once in our young lives, we could abandon the reticent, unambitious side of ourselves. To hell with being cautious. I observed the tenebrous scenery through the window of the car. Trees, so many of them, eagerly penciling up into the twilight curtain of sky. The jack pine trees, the balsam firs, the Manitoba maples on the embankments on either side of the road, clustered together in sprawling groups, seemingly celebratory, as they jiggle and tossle their boughs, almost as if clapping their hands at me, while a soft wind seems to whisk and churn through the valley. Suffice to say, the pragmatic side of ourselves has definitely abandoned us. We feel as if we could overcome anything tonight. If there was any time that I could have jumped out of a plane with a parachute without throwing a tantrum, it would be now. I was up for an adventure in the middle of the night. So was my brother. There was no time like the present. I felt reasonably confident that my brother's Toyota Land Cruiser could overcome any challenges or obstacles along our path. It was a powerful, robust vehicle, capable of coping with less agreeable terrain. Once we'd left town, we noticed that the only light around us was from the headlights of the car, but the bright night was clustered with a fabulous showing of twinkling stars this evening, while a silvery moon conquered the darkness with her ethereal luminescence. The trees are like vertical cardboard cutouts in dense, sturdy shapes. They consume the darkness, becoming one with it. In a trice, my brother's truck is wobbling and shaking unsteadily as it tackles a gross impediment in our path that is heavily littered with sculptural rocks and jagged appendages that jut out like sharp knives that could pierce your tires with effortless ease. Even the rocks themselves could so easily toss your car over the edge of the mountainous elevation if you should slip or swerve in the wrong direction, with just one bump. In my humble opinion, not even a four-wheel drive can overcome this toilsome road, that I doubt was ever a road in the first place. I astutely pointed this out to my brother earlier on. I told him it didn't look like a road, but he didn't listen. Of course not. He thought he knew better, as is always the case with my brother. We had come out tonight to have fun, even travel down roads we had avoided in the past, but I hadn't expected this. I hadn't anticipated my brother's doggedly determined nature to venture down a path like this. His truck is a hair's breadth away from the sheer, craggy outcrop. One wrong move and our car could roll over to the bottom of the valley. Let's just say we would be unlikely to survive this, if that should happen.
"Bloody hell," says my brother. "I don't think this is a road at all. You must have been right all along. How could I have got it so horribly wrong? I'm going to have to back out of here, or we'll be in a terrible pickle. This place is treacherous. The problem is, how am I going to do it? It looked like a road, but it's a bulky, rugged terrain. That's what it is. At one time it might have been a road, but not anymore. It's not suitable for even a car like mine. If we're not careful, it could mean we go rolling down all those jagged rocks to the valley below. That thought is not a good one."
Suddenly I feel defeated, like a punctured beach ball, as the joy has been expunged from me. My mood is rapidly deflating. It's going down and down and down. I feel as flat and subdued as a plain piece of white paper. My former cocky confidence has now deserted me, as if I've sobered up from sunbathing in the intoxicating afterglow of my success. My former effervescent champagne-like sparkle has all but sizzled away. I observe my brother's tense, strained demeanour. His jawline is clenched tightly. His back is stiff and straight. His hands grasp the steering wheel, holding on to it for dear life. I know he's worried about getting his car out of here. I hold my breath. My fists compress together tightly in my lap. My throat becomes scratchy. I can barely say a word, but I manage a squeak. I think we should leave your truck here. Walk away from here. I don't know if you can maneuver your truck safely out of here. One move in the wrong direction. We're in trouble. We could land at the bottom of the cliff over there."
"I've got this, sis," says my brother, with a mock confidence. "Just you wait and see. I'll back out of here very carefully, move away from the sheer face of the cliff, back onto the proper road. I believe we can do it. I have faith." His stumbling words betray his lack of conviction. Then it happens, as my brother manoeuvres the car backwards. My worst nightmare tumbles inauspiciously into our lives, like an unwelcome dinner guest. In that second, I know we're going to die. It is like everything happens in slow motion. Our truck wheels back over some loose rocks. It loses its traction. They try to grip on the unsteady, scarred ground beneath, which offers them no support whatsoever. The truck is thrown violently forwards, losing its balance, spinning, reeling, and toppling precariously and dangerously over the overhang. It's plunging, plummeting, descending down the bluff to the valley below. I was expecting the truck to continue its rolling descent, nose-diving, walloping down the menacing craggy outcrops, but it suddenly stops, as if by magic. Right now its steel aluminium carcass should be beaten to a pulp as it plummets down the revengeful high incline of the rugged barranco. For a moment all is very still, as if I'm snatched up in a nightmare from which I will surely awaken, because that's what this is. It's just a nightmare. But the silence is conspicuous. All of a sudden the rear of my brother's truck is lifted up and dragged away from the sheer precipice of the cliff face, as if the car is a wheelbarrow being yanked powerfully backwards. We can hear the truck scraping across the rocks, as if heavy arms are pulling it away from the treachery of the abyss. My brother's truck is soon lifted above the rocky outcrops so that it is elevated above the ground. Me and my brother are now suspended in the front seats of the truck, as if we're being wheeled away in a pram, like two babies. It's so dark, apart from the shimmering shafts of pearly moonlight, but we can barely see a thing. We hear two voices chatting away happily to each other in a foreign language. The voices are audibly clear, incorporating clicks. The conversation is engaged, spirited, animated even, as if the people talking are highly intelligent. But who are they? I am befuddled, confused. The beings are almost carrying us in the air, as if it's no big deal for them, something they do every day of their lives, without batting an eyelid. "What the hell?" whispers my brother to me, his face an expression of complete bewilderment. He reaches for his torch in the dashboard, flashes it towards the window, to see if he can see anything outside, but it's so glaring, we can't see a thing. Something or someone extricated us from almost certain death, but who or what? In that second, I know we've been rescued by angels. No one else, and nothing else on this earth, could have helped deliver us like this. "It's God's angels," I whisper to my brother. "They redeemed us from certain death." A grateful tear spills down my face. It trickles down my cheeks, drops over the precipice of my chin to my chest, without being wiped away by my thumbs. I'm touched to the quick, honoured that God would send his angels to liberate us. I know how many people are killed in accidents every year. It feels like we've been plucked away from disaster, which makes me feel incredibly privileged to be so favoured. My brother's truck is being lowered into a road that is easy to navigate, the road we were trying to get back onto in the first place, but we've been delivered to it safely. Me and my brother quickly tumble out of the car as fast as we can with an eager haste, leaving the car doors wide open. We're hoping to see the angels that relieved us from almost certain death. We see two large silhouettes walking away from the scene. The figures have to be angels. They're mighty, majestic, lofty, tall, easily 10 foot, weighing 1,000 pounds. Something's not right, though. Angels are not covered in hair. But these idiosyncratic, mysterious beings, whatever in God's name they are, do appear to be covered in long, flowing dark hair that is swaying in the wind. "Excuse me," I say, running up to the angelic being. Both silhouettes stop walking. Two heads turn around to look directly at me, while my brother's torch caresses their faces so that we can see them both clearly. I'm staring at two Herculean Bigfoot. I never knew creatures like this existed in North America, although I dare say I have heard the indigenous people talk about such beings before, that are often referred to as the guardians of the forest, but I never fully appreciated how outer-worldly they are. Both the Bigfoots are staring at me with bright yellow eyes, which I realize is caused from an eyeshine, but in my mind they are every bit as angelic as the stereotype white beings with wings we are told are angels. All I can say is that these two beautiful creatures were surrounded by a palpable loving energy. I knew I was in the presence of an extraordinary, godly, unconditional love that knows no boundaries, no prejudices, no restrictions, no bias, no limitations in its favour. It was a love the likes of such I have never experienced before or since. So to me these two Bigfoot were unequivocally angels in every single regard. I dash up to one of the Bigfoots, as if greeting a long-lost old friend that I haven't seen for an age. I throw my arms around him, surprising myself by the solid, sturdy, robust substance of his physical being. I'm sobbing with relief in his chest, my tears wetting his long hair. I realize in his arms I'm like a fragile doll. I didn't feel an ounce of fear, not for a moment, not when you're surrounded by such a resplendent love. Feelings of fear are never engaged, or even contemplated for that matter. The Bigfoot held me close to him. He presses my body tightly to his chest. I can feel the rise and fall of his breath, the rich fragrance of moss and earth upon his being, a pleasant, very pleasing smell. He's patting my back and saying something I don't understand. Omolona, Vanalina, Omodosso. Thank you, I say,
You saved our lives. We nearly died. You rescued us. The large Bigfoots look at the both of us. We hear words in our heads. You are meant to be saved. Go in peace. We watch the Bigfoots gliding away. They nod at us and pursue their conversation as we hear them talking backwards and forwards to each other until their voices finally are gone, as are they. Me and my brother drive back home until my brother stops the car and sighs. Did that really happen? I nod and say, it sure did. My brother shakes his head and says, tonight we were delivered by Bigfoot angels. All these years later, when I reflect on this event, I have goosebumps. Sometimes I say to myself, no, that didn't happen. But I assure you, it did. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Growing up, my grandmother was a sad, dispirited, desolate woman. It was as if she was a barren, isolated wilderness, longing for fresh rains to revive the dry wasteland of her despair. But in her case, the rain was not forthcoming. For many who knew my grandmother believed she was carrying an invisible weight upon her shoulders, weighing her down so heavily in life, overwhelming her with the burden of a great sobering grief that seemed to cling to her life steadfastly, like the barnacles on a turtle shell. I was only later, at the grand old age of 16, to personally discover how bad her heartbreak actually was. It was rooted far deeper than I could have ever envisaged, and this pain was steeped in a poignant entanglement of regret, disappointment, secrecy, shame, and even an unforgiveness that she had punished herself with for all these years. It was as if she daren't ever enjoy life, or surround herself with beauty, as others less fortunate than herself had needlessly had their lives stolen and extinguished from them long before their time. So for her it was almost morally wrong, or corrupt, so to speak, to surround herself with happiness at all, that she certainly felt she was unworthy to attain. My grandmother's late husband James was in the American Air Force, the kind of man who loved our great and mighty land, so much that he was willing to surrender his life to both God and country, without even a fleeting hesitation, as he was so proud to be American, and desirous to stand up for the beliefs of our founding fathers. I had secretly long suspected my grandmother's melancholia may have had a lot to do with the Second World War, when her husband James, who was on active duty between the years 1943 and 1945, was one of the victims of the Second World War. It would seem a third of the Allied forces were deployed at the time for active duty, having seriously been bogged down with far greater responsibility after Italy surrendered and Germany finally took over. My grandfather was involved in these bombing air raids over German cities. By all accounts, his team systematically targeted German transportation links and so forth. Unfortunately, my grandfather, who was flying a B-24 Liberator at the time, a long-range bomber, renowned for precision bombing raids, the best of its kind. Its accuracy was phenomenal and on target. It was with regret that the B-24 bomber carried with it a negative stigma that every pilot flying the craft was painfully all too aware of, which meant flying above enemy territory became significantly more precarious. Let's just say that every flight was undertaken with a great measure of trepidation. The B-24 bomber was often referred to as the flying coffin, as its greatest disadvantage was it only had one exit. This meant it was impossible to escape from a crippled B-24 in perilous life-threatening situations, which surreptitiously implied that your fate was left in God's hands. My grandfather had been bombing Gotha, amidst a firestorm of anti-aircraft cannon shells, rockets, airburst bombs that had turned the sky into a shower of bullets, smoke and flak. It was a cantankerous storm in the heavens, so hellishly furious, with billowing black smoke, orange fireballs and ear-splitting noises, so loud that the ground heaved and groaned beneath the thunderous, unmerciful assault, while targeted buildings spewed up angrily the wrath of their foundations, spilling into the skies like molten lava from a volcano, with debris scattered everywhere, like rugged grey confetti, littering the ground in a scene of great carnage, the footnote of war, a sight not for the faint-hearted to rest their eyes upon. Unfortunately, my grandfather's B-24 Liberator was blown up into clouds of smoke. He was killed instantly, but many of the lucky pilots, if you can call them that, limped back to England and America, with wounds far deeper than those you could physically see, their lives forever tarnished by the grim realities and oppressive memories of a war, born out of the seeds of a shocking and vile prejudicial hatred, the likes of such that the world has never ever seen before. It would seem that my grandparents were very much in love. They were living at the time at my grandmother's parents' large Greek Revival farmhouse, in the heart of the West Virginian countryside. One day as my grandfather walked out of the farmhouse, he turned around, took my grandmother in his arms tenderly and said, "I shan't be coming back this time, but make sure you look after our 2 children," which at the time was my mother Pearl, who was 2, and her sister Diana, about 5. My grandmother had grabbed my grandfather and said, "What are you talking about? What do you mean you're not coming back? How can you say such a dreadful thing? How can you say such a thing? Do you know the power of words?" My grandfather had kissed her tenderly on the cheeks and said to her, "I will always love you. Please remember that. But I'm not coming back. I know it in here," he said, tapping his belly. "It's in my gut. I'm at peace with it. I've accepted my fate. You must also find peace with it." My grandmother was sobbing obstreperously. "Don't say that, James. You can't say that. You can't afford to be so pessimistic. You know that naturally invites disaster." The tears drenched my grandmother's clothes indignantly. She's trying to pull her husband back into the house, but he resists her, pushing her away gently, with a loving, firm hold that tells her quite clearly that he can't be persuaded to change his mind over this mission. He says, "I'm doing this for America, for our children's children. One day, generations of Americans will thank us for this freedom we are purchasing for them." It was later my grandmother's mother found her daughter, my grandmother, lying on the kitchen floor, curled up in a fetal position, with 2 dogs lying on either side of her, both licking her face tenderly, as if perceiving her insufferable pain, and offering her a measure of comfort. My grandmother had cried and cried, like she'd never cried before. I remember her telling me she didn't know she had so many tears to cry. She felt as if she could have filled a large pond with every drop of them, or given their saltwater content, she figured a rock pool by the ocean might have benefited from them. "Get off the floor, dear," my grandmother's mother had said, helping her daughter up off the ground. She was a sorry, wretched sight, her dress bedraggled and crumpled, her eyes red from crying so many tears. "James is not coming back," says my grandmother to her mother, in a deep hoarse croak, while she buried her head in her mother's cotton blouse, and wept and wept. Her mother comforts her, rubbing her back and trying to reassure her distressed daughter, who could not be comforted or consoled, for peace had left her heart the moment her husband had kissed her goodbye. She also knew in her gut he was right. He wasn't coming back. She would be left without a husband, her children without a father. This was so not what she wished for. She could personally wring Hitler's neck, throw him to the wolves if she was given the chance. He was responsible for this worldwide mess and calamity. The man was a monster. She despised him with every breath of her being. "Who's not coming back?" asked my grandmother's sister Amber, entering the room. "My husband isn't coming back." "Oh, for goodness sake, Pearl, give it a break, will you? Stop feeling so sorry for yourself. Men all over the world are dying in this war. It happens. James chose to become a pilot in the Air Force. Of course he's at risk of dying, but you knew that when you married him. It was a risk you took. Get over it, girl. You're going to have to learn to be a little bit tougher than you are. We're at war, and we have to be brave. That's just the way it is." "Now, Amber, I have had enough of your insolence. That is not a kind way to talk to your sister, is it?
Your words are mean-spirited and hard-hearted. Where on earth is your compassion, young lady? Have you forgotten we're in this war together? We need to lift each other up in adversity, not crush each other like this. I think you need to wash out your mouth, young lady, with soap and water, and right now. Mind your words. We can only hope that all the Americans involved in this war will return home safely to us, of which I'm quite certain James will be one of them. My grandmother Pearl looks up at her mother through tear-stained eyes. You don't understand, Mum, do you? James told me he has a gut feeling he's not coming back. He told me he loved me, that I need to take care of our children. My grandmother's face physically pales. If he said that, dear, then he's not coming back. I hate to say it, darling. Sometimes you know when your time is up. It's not the first time I've heard of people having a premonition of their own deaths. Perhaps it's a gracious gift from God, in order to help those that are leaving us finally say their goodbyes. I must admit, James gave me a very big goodbye before he left this morning, telling me to always take care of you, Pearl. I thought he was being rather intense. He kept telling me to give you strength, as you were going to need lots of it. I intend to be there for you, sweetheart, and that's a promise, she reassures her daughter. Whatever the future holds, we're going to be strong together. If James is fighting for us, we need to be strong for him too. But I don't understand. How could he know he's going to die? Pearl protests, her voice rising up to the high ceilings of the house, in a frantic shrieking sound, as her mother's sober words of bodeful reflection are not what she wants to entertain. In the same way, sweetheart, I knew you were a baby girl, long before you made your entrance into this world. Sometimes you just know things. You know the problem with the two of you is you're so damn superstitious, says Amber, her mouth turning into an upside-down skull. You know, hanging around the two of you is really like living in a mortuary. You're always saying, Hitler that, Hitler this, what's going to happen to our lives now that America has been thrown into the war? I mean, really, can't the two of you think about anything positive at all? You're not exactly riveting company right now, mooching over everything like a couple of grieving widows. For all you know, your husband will be back soon, Pearl. So get a grip, get over yourself. You and Mum, you're pathetic, feeling so sorry for yourselves all the time. I'm sorry, but I have to say it as it is. Aren't the wives of military men supposed to be made of tougher stuff than you are, Pearl? I can't honestly see what James saw in you at all. My word, Amber, you do know how to kick a dog when it's down, don't you? You can be quite cold and unfeeling sometimes. As I keep telling you, compassion for your sister's plight might actually be rather nice. We're all naturally upset about this war, Amber, even if you're not. There's been lots of rationing, especially on sugar, when we need it the most. We're all down. It hasn't been easy on any of us. Excuse me if we have hangdog expressions on our faces, but war has a way of getting you down. The rationing hasn't helped either. It's getting worse, so there's not exactly much to party about at the moment. But after the war is over, we shan't stop celebrating. I'm sure of that. I've got a feeling that the parties around here aren't going to stop. Suffice to say, a short while after my grandmother's husband James had left for his air raid mission over enemy turf in the B-24 Liberator he was flying, she had been notified about her husband's death, which did not come as a surprise, given her husband's conviction that he would not be returning, and her own gut feelings concerning the matter. I was to learn from my mother that my grandmother Pearl had never got over her husband's death. Every night she went to bed with her gilded photograph of James, in his navy uniform, by her bedside, and now in her early 80s, this routine had not changed. My mother told me once that her parents had a very loving relationship from what she had established from her own mother, but being only 2 at the time, she had no memories of her father. There was a large part of her that believed her mother was not only devastated by her husband's death, but angry with him for leaving her with her 2 children, especially since he knew he was going to die. She had never forgiven him for that. My grandfather James wrote to my grandmother Pearl a letter which read the following, which she received after his death. It had been given to Pearl's mother to give to her daughter when he did not return home from active duty. It read the following: "My darling Pearl, if you are reading this letter, you will know by now I am not coming home, and that I am now deceased. But do not grieve for me, my lovely. Don't shed a tear, but fill your life with heartfelt joy, with things to smile about. For our lives on this earth are, in my opinion, far too short. So in the long term, sorrow is a wasted emotion. It is the good things in life I went to war for, the things we often overlook and so often take for granted, the things that make us incredibly happy as Americans. Everything good in life comes with a price. Nothing is ever for free. Never forget that, Pearl. Our freedom is a gift of God, and if we have to fight for the freedom of our great and noble land, then sacrifices have to be made. And as is the case in every war, with every sacrifice there are inevitably casualties. I am a casualty of this war. But remember, never was a man more pleased to lay down his life for his fellow American and country as I am. Of course I wish it had not come to this. War is cruel, is no respecter of persons. It's like a disease, that if it's not amputated, will spread to the rest of the body, or, as is the case in war, destroy the freedoms of the world as we know it. All I know is our marriage and our 2 children are the most precious things in my life. I wish I could have been around for you, and to raise our children. But you all have my heart, and I will watch over you from the other side, until one day we meet again. Know this, Pearl, my love. For you, my love will never fade, nor can it be blemished or soiled from this war. All my fondest love to you, James."
Let me take you to the beginning of my extraordinary story that revolves around my grandmother, as you might come to suspect, and leads to an incredulous, outlandish encounter that even I marvel about, all these years later. Sometimes I stop and ponder, did that really happen? But I assure you, it most certainly did. This is a story that is rooted in a love story from the Second World War, a broken heart, hidden secrets, a shocking revelation that would make your hair curl, the kind of story that Universal Studios would dream to show at the box office if they got the chance. The irony is that this story would never have unravelled like an ancient scroll spilling out all its clandestine secrets if both me and my brother had not fortuitously spent 6 weeks with my grandmother. It was almost as if the hands of time were itching for this moment, for an unhealthy secret to be purged and unearthed, a secret that needed to be shared, a secret that had brought with it a tsunami of regret and grief. At the time, shortly before the story rolled out into our time space, me and my brother Earl were living in the eclectic east side of New York City, with both our parents, not too far from the famous Katz's Delicatessens, well known for its phenomenal sandwiches, filled with dense carved layers of meat, and Domino Park. It's the part of town where you see gritty galleries, tenement-style buildings, upscale apartment blocks, and elegant avant-garde boutiques. It is at night that this part of town becomes alive and buzzing, very hip, attracting young crowds to trendy bars, music venues and restaurants alike. The Jewish part of the area is through Orchard Street, on the Lower East Side. My parents rented a very well-appointed, fully furnished apartment in this area, where we lived with its densely urban feel. But over the years, apart from Christmas and Easter, we never got to see our grandmother Pearl very much, which was a deep regret of my mother's, although she did speak to Pearl every day on the telephone. My grandmother lived close to the town of Somerville in West Virginia, in Nicholas County, located in the mountains, an 8-hour drive from our home. It was the original Greek Revival family home that she'd inherited from her parents after their death. But as for her sister Amber, no one knew what had become of her. Many assumed that after the war she'd moved away, lost touch with her family roots. But from what I'd learnt, she was not a very likeable character, and her apathetic indifference towards her blood relatives surprised no one. She'd always been a snarky type, with a devilish disregard for people, and a temper rather inclined to get somewhat inflamed. When my mother informed me that she and my dad were going abroad for 6 weeks, and that we were to go and stay with our grandmother Pearl, I was thrilled. I adored the countryside and escaping the hub and bub of city life. It pleased me greatly, even at 16 years old, because I appreciated the transfixing beauty of the natural world. In truth, I don't think my brother Earl was keen about spending time in nature, not like I was. Ostensibly, he was certain we could become easily bored out there. I mean, what was there to do in the country? By all accounts, even the small town with a tiny mall, a theatre, a scattering of restaurants seemed mundane to him, compared to the excitement of New York. My grandmother's farmhouse was tucked away in the heart of a valley, surrounded by the theatrical views of the mountains and complemented by vast clusters of ubiquitous trees. Let's just say, everywhere you looked, there were trees. But then that is West Virginia for you. As the taxi driver drove down the long precipitous gravel road, laced with a plethora of rocks that rolled under his rubber tyres, leading to my grandmother's farmhouse, I had to stop to draw breath for a moment. There are no words to describe the transfixing views that grabbed my attention like a very big nudge. Stretching out before us were the undulating oceans of viridescent resplendence, where manicured green grass folds so seamlessly into sumptuous verdant trees that plunder the skyline in a stately regal repose, their boughs hemorrhaging a confetti of green leaves that tumble over the branches, while billowing countryside rises and falls in steep voluptuous mountainous inclines, so that every single part of the countryside is artfully sculptural. Nothing is flat, insipid or uninspiring. It is arrestingly beautiful. The big blue sky seems so large compared to New York, hovering above our heads like a cobalt blue canopy that stretches out into the ether for an eternity, dappled with candy floss fluffy white clouds. It's all just so stunning. Soon we reach the bright white house that glitters like mother of pearl, made to resemble white marble against the sparkling green of the countryside. The house is an 1820 Greek Revival farmhouse. Well, so I've been told. But then again, I'm not au fait with Greek architecture. Let's just say it's a pleasing symmetrical shape, rather reminding me of a Greek temple, with its columns on front of the house that support the ceiling of the long porch. There's a window in the pediment, highly decorative cornices, pediments, and unadorned friezes. The taxi rolls up to the side of the house and parks. The taxi driver opens the car door for me, and of course my brother. He moves to the trunk to pull out the bright pink suitcase of mine and my brother's more colourful one, aligned with squiggles of all American states on it. An elderly woman gracefully emerges from the house. I know this is Pearl, the grandmother of whom I'm only briefly acquainted. Seeing her again brings on a sudden bashful reserve and a shyness that catches me off guard. I'm not usually shy. I suppose the fact that I've only met her a handful of times may have something to do with my reticence. My brother is flushing a bright pink colour as my grandmother moves towards us to embrace us in an effusive warm hug. I know my brother loathes hugs. He's possibly physically squirming in his awkwardness. Suffice to say, she carries herself with an elegant gait, despite her advancing years. She's a neat woman, dressed in a long tweed skirt, a white shirt with a cameo brooch clutching the top button under her collar. Her white hair is neatly swept away from her face, the length pinned back into a sizable bun, suggesting that my grandmother is blessed with lots of hair. Her face betrays a healthy skin, with a fullness most uncommon in women of her age, but the crow's feet around her eyes are etched into the skin quite fiercely. Perhaps this is what might rarely reveal her age, along with the layered crinkles on her neck. Whether she is genuinely pleased to see us or not, I can't be sure, but she does give my brother a shocked look, as if she's seen a ghost. "Forgive me, Earl, but my word, you're the splitting image of your grandfather James, when he was a young man." At this my brother lets out a cheeky grin. "Thanks. I hear he was quite handsome." "Oh, he was more than handsome, dear. Your grandfather was a hero. Let me just say this, to your young ears. Beauty is fleeting. It is soon forgotten. But character is indelible. It's always remembered. It lasts forever. Your grandfather, my dear boy, he was an American hero." My grandmother possesses that charming age-old English reserve that many Americans adopted in the older generations, where she blushingly buries her emotions like a squirrel hoarding its nuts for winter, and is guarded in her approach towards us like a female doe that is very cautious around people. It's as if we're strangers that she needs to watch with a wary hesitancy, when we're actually her grandchildren. We watch the taxi driver leaving the premises, which he does with a begrudging reluctance. I get the impression he wouldn't have minded being invited in for a drink. He dutifully gives us a polite wave, climbs back into his truck, drives away with a fast acceleration, down what I consider to be a dicey, turbulent, choppy driveway. Our grandmother leads us into the house. She tells us to plonk our suitcases in the hallway, which we do with little encouragement, glad to be relieved of the heavy weight. Come into the kitchen for some homemade lemonade, she tells us. I am surprised, if not a wee bit disappointed, by the interiors of Pearl's house, that really could be resplendent if style and colour had been artfully engaged. But Pearl's house is fitted with sturdy, practical furnishings that are severe in their style, unglamorous, robust and practical, as if elegant style and sophistication have been wilfully abandoned with a deliberate intent. I discern with a degree of bewilderment that dark colours have been recruited in the rooms, in both the furnishings and drapery, and even the artwork on the walls is oppressive, where pictures of thunderstorms, deserts with a scattering of cactuses, and a barren wilderness decorate the walls, along with a few contemporary art pieces that look like an angry artist on a bad hair day, who was having a row with his wife, simply flung a plethora of paint at a canvas, in splashes of reds, oranges and blacks. Then he signed his name at the bottom of the canvas. The pictures are hostile. They make me cringe. The only way I can describe the house to you is on the inside it's joyless. It's almost as if the house reveals my grandmother's current state of mind, as if an unexpressed, dormant sadness is cloaking the house in the veil of her grief, as if the house is one large weeping widow that is bathing in her own melancholia. Perhaps in the furnishings and decor, my grandmother is expressing the hidden tentacles of her pain. By Jove, my brother whispers to me, the inside of this house is like a morgue. Such dark carpets, floors, dark curtains, mahogany furniture. You'd never believe this was a woman's place, would you? And those pictures on the walls scream with anger. I'm no artist, but whoever painted that picture, he says, pointing to the big piece of contemporary art above the fireplace, let's just say they were in a vile mood. July 1937. James is excited to meet what he hopes will be his potential in-laws, Mr. and Mrs. Hemingway, in a matter of weeks. He has fallen head over heels in love with their daughter Pearl, whom he's decided he wanted to marry. But it was best to get acquainted with the family first, before he presumptuously asked Pearl's father permission to marry his daughter. If the truth be told, when he first laid eyes on Pearl, he knew she was the one. She reminded him of a very delicate, rare wild flower in the meadow that needed to be handled with the utmost of care, due to her fragility. He loved the fact that Pearl was oblivious to her own attractiveness. She was shy and demure, gentle like a doe. Who is that lovely young lady? He asked his friend at the dance, being hosted by an animal charity in the town hall. Oh, that's Pearl Hemingway. Would you like an introduction? Yes, please, he'd said. On that night he danced with Pearl, and looked into her timorous eyes. His heart had missed a beat. The chemistry between the two of them had been undeniably electric, the attraction mutual. They had stared into each other's eyes, unable to look away. Pearl was very pretty, her face elegantly adorned with a curtain of blonde wispy hair that could look white in certain lights, a porcelain complexion, a slender, lanky body that was delicate like she was, but she moved with grace and elegance like a ballerina, with a back as straight as a pencil. At first Pearl had been a tight rosebud in their relationship, reluctant to open up, but that had intrigued and mystified James all the more, as he had skilfully, very carefully pulled back the petals, one by one. He knew in Pearl he'd found a precious diamond, and women like Pearl were rare, hard to come by. He had struck gold. When James' friends drops him off at Pearl's family farmhouse for luncheon, he is struck with a sense of déjà vu, as if he's been here before. But that's not possible. It's a disturbing feeling that he can't shake off, that leaves him feeling more than a little confounded.
"I'll pick you up later," his friend chuckles. "Good luck, James, with the parents."
James ebulliently climbs out of the truck. He watches his friend driving away. The truck jolts and heaves over a hostile, uneven driveway, littered with rocks, dappled with fallen leaves. This place gives him an unsettling feeling that brings on an unpleasant chill that spirals down his spine. Why does he feel as if he's been here before? The house is absolutely magnificent, the great embodiment of Greek revival architecture, nestled between the undulating curls and folds of the spectacular, viridescent West Virginian countryside. It looks like a gleaming white pearl in an oyster shell. James walks to the front door steadily, surprised to find that his hands are actually shaking. Luckily, before he even knocks at the door, Pearl has dutifully flung it open. She greets him with a large, wide smile and an effusive, warm hug that seems to hijack the angst he was beginning to feel. "Don't worry about my parents," she whispers. "They're great people. They won't bite. You'll love my mother and my dad too." Pearl had been absolutely right. The lunch had gone seamlessly, and Pearl's father had ushered him into the study to have a one-on-one chat later that afternoon. Mr. Hemingway pours James a scotch in a sturdy glass, sliding it over to him on the oakwood desk.
"I'll come right to the point, young man. No point in beating around the bush. I like you an awful lot. I can see you're very good for my daughter. But what are your intentions with her? That's what I would like to know." "Sir, I will be straight with you. I'm head over heels in love with your daughter. I would very much like to marry her. I came here today with the full intention of asking you for your blessing in this regard." Mr. Hemingway is chuffed. His back straightens. He takes a swig of his scotch for Dutch courage. "Well, what's keeping you, young man? When are you going to ask her? There's no time like the present. It's clear to me you're both very much in love." "What, sir? You want me to ask her now?" "Absolutely. Why don't you ask her in the living room?" he says, beckoning James into the room. "What are you two grinning about?" asked Mrs. Hemingway, looking up at her husband nonplussed. "The two of you look like you're scheming something. I want to know what you're up to." "I think James here would like to ask Pearl something."
James realizes he doesn't have a ring yet, but that matter can be attended to later. It's only a minor detail that can soon be addressed and rectified. On second thoughts, maybe it'll mean Pearl can choose her own ring, as woman he knows can be very particular in this regard. With a pounding heart that is racing through his chest and a whirling head, he wastes no time in kneeling down on the floor. He's looking up into Pearl's eyes with a devoted adoration, while Pearl's parents are excitedly clenching their hands together, their twinkling eyes savouring in this memorable moment. It is almost as if the room is holding its breath, as if it's recording this event that seeps into the cellular structures of the walls and is imprinted on the fragment of time. James takes Pearl's elegant hand in his and smiles at her warmly, so that Pearl's heart begins to melt.
"Pearl Hemingway, from the moment I met you, you stole my heart. Will you do me the honour of becoming my wife?"
Mrs. Hemingway is cupping her hands around her mouth in a shocked delight, while Mr. Hemingway's beam is so large it might just bounce off his face if he dares stretch those zygomatic muscles too far. It is Pearl's eyes that grow round. She emulates her mother by gasping. Then she throws herself into James' arms, hugging him so tightly. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes, yes, yes." Everyone begins to excitedly hug each other, and Mr. Hemingway welcomes James to the family.
"As far as I'm concerned, you're already my son."
All of a sudden, footsteps on the landing stroll over to the living room. A figure is standing in the doorway. It's Amber, Pearl's sister, who is physically scowling. "What the heck is going on in here?" "Oh, Amber, we have wonderful news," said her mother, dashing up to her daughter. "Meet your brother-in-law, James. He's only just asked Pearl to marry him. Isn't this so exciting? He is going to be your brother-in-law very, very soon." It is when Amber looks up at James, and James looks up at Amber. Their eyes lock in recognition. James begins to freeze. His blood goes cold. His heart is pounding. Oh my God, he's met this woman before. He's been in this house. He's slept in her bed. No wonder everything seemed so familiar when he arrived here for luncheon with the Hemingway family. No wonder he felt as if he'd been here before, because he had. This revelation makes his skin crawl, and the memory comes flooding back like a haunting nightmare that he didn't want to confront. This couldn't be happening, could it? Please, please, no. James recalls a night of drunken, outrageous madness, when he and his friends had become so smashed and inebriated, as they chatted up some spirited young woman from town. Their hormones were charged with a lascivious, unbridled passion that escalated into heavy petting between strangers. But in this drunken, frenzied, lustful revelry, the morals of an alley cat were welcomed gladly, while integrity was wilfully abandoned, rejected to the back seat. Amber had successfully seduced James. His inhibitions had been thrown to the wayside, his self-control not restrained. It hadn't taken much for Amber to lure him back to her farmhouse, assuring the young man that her parents were away and that they would have the entire place to themselves.
"Don't be such a wet blanket. Go on, it'll be fun," she had assured him. "My sister's in her bedroom, fast asleep. She won't wake up. No one else is here."
He barely remembers that shadowy night, where alcohol had knocked his senses far away. Suppressed indeterminate memories that were dulled into a hazy, nebulous blur, when even faces became veiled in a clouded, enigmatic obscurity, while the elusive, impalpable memories of that night are rather like a soaked letter, where the ink runs away, the paper becomes mushy, and you can make no sense of any of it at all. The impressions of his photographic recall of that night are shapelessly dull, vague, blurry. Yet he does remember the awkward discomfort and shameful horror of waking up in a perfect stranger's house and freaking out. It must have been about 7 a.m. when he climbed out of a stranger's bed and realized he wasn't actually at home. He was lying in an unfamiliar woman's bed, her hair strewn over her dented pillow like a blonde, messy curtain. He barely remembered a thing at all. In horror, he glances down at his naked body, with a measure of self-disgust and revulsion. The evidence of his night of passion is seen in the pool of clothes puddled all over the floor, along with the young woman's lingerie. James feels nauseously sick to the stomach. It eclipses the back of his throat, and like a deer caught in headlights, he quickly dresses as discreetly and clandestinely as possible. He rockets out of the house faster than a shooting star, grotesquely ashamed of his lack of self-control that had landed him in the stew pot. He was better than this. What the hell was he thinking? His behaviour last night was outrageous. It was a couple of weeks later in town, when an unfamiliar figure comes stomping up the street, with a look so ferocious it would have scared off a Rottweiler. At first he didn't recognise her. It was Amber. He's walking with his 2 friends side by side. One of his friends pipes, "Who's that woman, with the dagger looks, marching towards us with murder on her mind? She's one hell of a scary woman." In a trice, like a tornado, the feisty, pugnacious woman, wearing cowboy boots and a tunic dress, comes belligerently marching up to the 3 men. She thunders towards James, thrusting her knee in the air, kicking into his groin forcefully with such a powerful punch. He recoils in a crippling, agonizing pain, his torso buckling over his knees, his legs crossing, his face flushing a bright pink. That was one hell of a hard kick. "Bloody hell, woman! That bloody hurt! What is your problem?" "Good! You deserved that. You came home with me, James. You used me. You dumped me. Men like you make me sick to my stomach. I don't appreciate being used and spat out like that." She spits at James. Her frothy spittle lands on his jacket. Then she stomps away. The bemused men stare silently after her. The angry woman seems to gallop over the sidewalk, like an incandescent bison, thundering across the open plains, lifting up the red earth in its indignation. For a while, no one says a single thing. as if the strange, incongruous moment is so bizarre that it takes a moment to fully assimilate its sobering impact.
Bloody hell, James! What did you do to her? Whatever you did, you really upset her most grievously. You should be careful who you go home with, James. That woman is clearly a shark with stiletto teeth. She could eat you alive for breakfast if you're not careful. That woman should come with a warning sign. Don't touch. Exceedingly poisonous. Very dangerous. You're not kidding, says James.
Back here in the festive atmosphere of the Hemingways' cosy living room, surrounded by the animated, pleased expressions of Pearl's parents, James feels as if he's been flung from a celebratory pot of sweet honey, directly into the firing line of the capricious figure of Amber Hemingway. Could this really be happening to him? James quickly draws in a deep breath as Amber meets his eyes gleefully. There's a delighted smirk on her face, a cocky, arrogant, defiant look that says, "I'm going to eat you alive, young man, and tear your life to shreds. See if I don't." "Pleased to meet you, James. Why is it that I have the sneaky feeling that we've met somewhere before? I do wonder where that could be." "You think you've met James before?" says Mrs. Hemingway. "How extraordinary. Well, I suppose it's a very small world." "You're not kidding about that, Mother. How about I go and make everybody a lovely cup of tea to celebrate this exciting news? Congratulations, sister dear. You've landed yourself quite some catch in James here," she says sarcastically. James pretends to require an ablution break. He scampers quickly to the kitchen. Amber looks up at him in surprise as she's preparing the tea tray for everyone. "Oh, it's you. Why doesn't that surprise me at all? You're scared I'm going to tell my little sister what you're really like, are you?"
Look, Amber, I know what I did that night was not good, and I apologize for it. I was drunk and inebriated. Yes, I came home with you. I'm ashamed because I have no memory of the event. When I woke up in the morning to find myself in your bed, I was mortified. That is why I did a panicky runner, I'm afraid. But I would truly appreciate your discretion in regards to this matter. I would be grateful if you didn't tell your sister about any of this, or what happened between us. It's not that I want to keep secrets from her, but I know if she thought we'd spent a night together, even though it happened long before I met her, I think it would cause her unnecessary, undue, grievous hurt, which she does not deserve. I'm in love with your sister, and I don't want to hurt her. She's delicate. She's precious. She means the world to me."
"So I was just a little roll in the hay for you, was I? Another notch to your bedpost? You make me sick. Men like you make me sick, the whole lot of you. I think Pearl deserves to know what a snake in the grass she's actually marrying, don't you?"
"Well, then I'm going to have to tell her what happened from my perspective," says James, "as you don't actually come out of this story smelling of roses either. I may remind you, you were throwing yourself at me that night, so don't get on the high and mighty, holier-than-thou roller coaster. You're as guilty as I am, if not more so."
"Very well, I won't say a thing, but only for my sister's sake. But if you step out of line for a single minute, I will tell her everything. Do you get it?" Back to current day, with Saskia, Pearl's granddaughter. My grandmother had led us into her kitchen. It's as cold and austere as the rest of the house. The flagstone floors are dark. They're complemented by dark mahogany kitchen cupboards. And there's nothing homely about this kitchen, apart from the large cream-range oven that softens the hardness of the dark colours. Even the curtains that align the windows are a dark navy blue, so dark they're almost black. "Please sit down," says my grandmother, placing down 3 glass goblets onto the kitchen counter, filling them with ice-cold lemonade. She piles some chocolate brownies onto a plate that she'd bought from the local bakery. "Just so you know," she says, "breakfast is always at 8, lunch at 12:30, dinner at 7.
Of course you can help yourself to snacks in between meals at your will. But a word of warning, I detest any leftovers. I abhor waste of any kind. I grew up in a time when rationing happened here in America. It wasn't as bad as it was in Britain and other places, but we still had coupons, so let's say any waste is something that grieves my heart greatly. Upstairs I have a room in the attic where you can paint or play board games together. But I would appreciate it that when you're in the house, you keep the noise down. I'm an old lady now. I don't appreciate children's shrieks. In the barn outside, I have bicycles you're welcome to use to ride around the countryside. There are lots of lovely walking trails around here, so let me know if you want to take a picnic any time. There's a library upstairs where you can find books to read on the upper floor. And, of course, there's a television room for your entertainment. I don't stand on ceremony here, but I do appreciate punctuality. I'm not good with children, never have been. But if the two of you behave yourself here, we should get on just fine. Now, when you've finished your lemonade, you can find your way upstairs. Your bedroom, Saskia, is pink. I know girls love pink. And your bedroom, Earl, has been painted in green, as it's an earthy colour. It matches the countryside, which I am sure will be agreeable for you. I got a designer to prepare them both for you. Once you've finished your light refreshment, you may unpack your suitcases and put your clothes away in your wardrobe. Also, I would thoroughly appreciate it if you didn't call me grandmother. Such a word reminds me of my age. None of us need to be reminded of that. I'd feel much happier if you would call me Pearl. There, I think I've said all I need to say. I'm now going onto the patio to do some embroidery. I'd prefer not to be disturbed, unless an interruption is very necessary. Me and my brother Earl were delighted to discover that there were 2 rooms in the house that were light and airy, full of promise. These rooms were our bedrooms, which Pearl had graciously had personally decorated for us by a designer. I was exceedingly grateful. It was an escape from the tenebrous darkness of the rest of the house, which did little to inspire me, which was why I preferred the sanctuary of my own bedroom. Maybe that was Pearl's idea, of ensuring that we preferred to remain in our own bedrooms rather than going trumpeting around the rest of the house, like a couple of ungainly elephants. If that was the case, her plan was working favourably. Me and my brother always gravitated to our bedrooms in that large house. My bedroom was done in a very luxurious, dramatic, opulent-looking autumn pink wallpaper, laced with roses, done in a translucent, shimmering gold, which gave the room an old-world Victorian kind of appearance. The windows in my room were huge, graced by long flowing curtains with drapes that caressed the oakwood flooring, like the verdant streamers of a willow tree skimming the surface of the water. There was a huge double 4-poster bed, a chaise lounge, a dressing table, and a closet. My brother's room was identical to mine, with exactly the same furnishings, only with more masculine influences. The rich emerald green wallpaper in his room was covered in translucent gold trees, and the shelves of his room boasted models of toy boats and cars that were vintage collector's pieces, possibly worth a bob or two, given the immaculate condition they were in. I think my brother was genuinely chuffed by his bedroom and very enamoured, thankful to my grandmother for going to so much trouble on his account, even though she was detached and emotionally distant towards the both of us, which is not what you'd expect from your traditional grandmother. Much like me, my discerning brother Earl, who never missed anything, perceived that behind my grandmother's prim and proper facade was a woman who was grieving bitterly. We observed that my grandmother did indeed have a gilded, framed picture of my grandfather James in his Air Force uniform on her bedside table, along with a candle that she lit every night to honour his memory. My brother thought it was rather strange that in my grandmother's more youthful days, after James had sadly died, that she'd never got remarried again. "You know," he said, "to me the Second World War was a long time ago. You'd think she'd move on with her life." "Maybe it's not so easy," I'd said. "It sounds like they had a very special love. You can't always replace that." The first few days of living with our grandmother were quite tough. We only rarely got to see her at meal times. It was all terribly formal, with her treating us like glorified guests in her home, rather than her beloved grandchildren. Her demeanour towards us was apathetic, nonchalant and indifferent, and we noted she liked to spend all her time in her own company, and was rarely rather reclusive. One day me and my brother saw a whole new side to our grandmother, almost as if the veneer she had hidden behind for so long
just slipped away. And beneath this mask we saw a beautiful woman who was carrying so much pain that had robbed her life of such joy. It all began when one night, as I was lying fast asleep in my bed upstairs, I was certain I'd heard a strange sound. I sat up very quickly in my bed, with a start, listening very hard, listening very carefully. I knew I'd heard something outside the house, but what? I could hear the distinct sound of feet pressing down on the pebbles, as if someone quite heavily built was walking around my grandmother's front yard. The first discomposing thought that enters my mind is there's an unwelcome prowler meddling around on the property. I decide to investigate. It doesn't occur to me to waken my brother. I think my mind is fueled by a heated inquisitive curiosity. I need to find out who is out there in the yard. My own safety is only an afterthought. My bedroom is bathed in an ethereal light. It cascades across the landing in a soft trajectory. It's very pretty. It means I can slip down the sweeping staircase quite easily. I quickly throw on a dressing gown, wrapping the toweling robe around my middle, and putting on my sheepskin slippers with their rubber soles. I pad down the staircase. My grandmother's bedroom door is slightly ajar, but I can hear her light snores, and I know she's fast asleep. I tiptoe into the main lounge to retrieve the fire poker, hanging on a hook by a very large marble fireplace. I knew my mother had always told me that for a woman a fire poker is a much better tool to use than a rifle, and that's what you should always grab if your life feels threatened. I didn't feel I was in any danger, but it was always better to be safe than sorry. One clap on the head with a fire poker, you could potentially knock the intruder unconscious and call the police. But you couldn't hit them too hard, or you might just kill them. So you had to be careful about that. The pressure you used with the poker would depend on how great the threat was imposed against you. I tiptoed towards the back kitchen door. I figured it would be a noiseless, unobtrusive door to open. It was regularly oiled. I knew this because I saw my grandmother doing it only the other day. If I slipped out the back way, I would not alert the intruder to my presence. I cannot say I felt fear, and I'm not exactly sure why. I followed a natural instinct in my gut, which meant not engaging much thought, but just going with the flow. I needed to find out who the heck was wandering around my grandmother's property. I knew it could be raccoons ferreting around, but I was sure I had heard a sizable man's feet very distinctly, but I was hoping it was just a wild animal. My grandmother kept a night light on around the house, which was useful, as I didn't have to switch on lights to draw any attention to myself. I managed to find a torch in the kitchen cupboard, and before I knew it I'd opened the back door without even a squeak or groan, shutting it silently behind me, until it clicked gently back into place. I could hear the prowler again. Whoever they were, they seemed to be restlessly walking back and forth along a pebbled path, and not really doing their best to be very quiet, which is incongruous, nonsensical behaviour for any intruder, is it not? If they carried on this way, they would almost certainly wake up the rest of the household. I manoeuvred myself stealthily against the wall, creeping along its side, hiding carefully in the dark shadows, clutching on to the walls with my hands. I even switched off my torch. A flurry of cool air blew against my skin, like a ghostly breath. There was a slight nip in the air, but I was used to the cold, so it was of little consequence to me. My shoulder-length dark hair fluttered and twitched against its gentle, gusty spanks. I hadn't reached the corner of the wall yet, and that was when I saw it. I say it because at first I had no comprehension of what I was actually seeing. You must remember I was a New York City girl, brought up in the trendy East Side, and let's just say I wasn't really aware of country life, but I knew enough to tell that whatever this thing was, it wasn't a bear. But what was it? It was monumentally huge, towering at about 8 foot tall, with sturdy humanoid proportions, a graceful, sturdy, robust stance, overlong arms. It was covered in a plethora of long, flowing dark hair. In the tenebrous darkness, I could see only its huge cardboard cutout silhouette, so it was the most intimidating thing that I have ever beheld. It would seem that before fear even entertained my thoughts, an inquisitive, intrigued curiosity just grabbed my attention so fiercely that for a moment fear bounded away, as I marvelled at what the spectral being could actually be, that had so much substance and form. It couldn't be anything outer-worldly or ghostly or even spectral. What the hell is that? Were my thoughts. A soft shaft of moonlight seemed to answer my question, as if for a brief second accommodating it, when the creature's face was basked in a gossamer light. I could see a square jawline, high cheekbones, hooded deep-set dark eyes, a flat nose, a leathery grey skin, a prominent heavily wrinkled forehead, and then a blazing bright light dawned in my head, and that was when I realised that this idiosyncratic, outlandish creature was almost certainly a Bigfoot. For me, this monumental discovery was nothing short of extraordinary, for it had never ever entered my mind that such a creature like this actually existed. For a moment I drew in a deep breath, holding it for a while, as if diving under the water. I clandestinely watched this creature. He was acting exactly like my dad, when he's got something on his mind that is troubling him, like a very difficult client he's dealing with. He'll walk around our yard at home to find a solution in his head. This is what this creature was doing. He seemed locked up in his own thoughts. He was pacing up and down, up and down, up and down. I knew he was thinking. Sometimes he would rub his hands together. Other times he would scratch his head. He moved up and down restlessly. His gait, for one so large, was remarkably graceful, I have to say. Up and down he paced on the pebbly path, almost with the frustration of a tiger in a zoo enclosure. Then it seemed he'd made a decision. I saw him ferreting around in my grandmother's shrubbery, as if looking for something that he had hidden there. Then he brought out this rather strange bundle. He seemed to move towards our front door. He lowered something on the ground there, although what it was, I couldn't even begin to imagine. The next thing I know is that the creature just glides away. He disappears into the woodgrove and is gone. It's only after he's gone that I have what I can only describe as a delayed shocked reaction. I'm shaking like a leaf. A complete cocktail of emotions just filters through me. Awe, excitement, that dominates the flavours of my response. It's an overwhelming sense of astonishment, with a predominant uncertainty, taking central stage, that is interlaced with doubt. Did that just happen? Was I dreaming? When you experience something that is so remarkable, it's easy to convince yourself it's an illusory lucid dream. But I knew this was no dream. This really happened. I'd seen a Bigfoot on my grandmother's property, and my observations of this creature made me mindfully aware of a supreme intelligence. My mind was filled with a reverential awe, that as I made my way back to my bedroom, I trembled like a jelly, not from fear, but just from the gravity of what had actually happened, rather like the aftermath of an earthquake. The ground can involuntarily just shake and tremble. It happened like that to me. Normally I'd be racing to my brother's room, shaking him hard and saying, "Guess what happened? Guess what happened?" But the desire to do that held no appeal to me whatsoever, which was peculiar in itself. I knew it would take me a significant amount of time to assimilate what I'd seen. Rather like a sponge placed in water, it might take a while to soak up all the liquid. It was like that for me, I suppose. The next morning I'm awoken to my grandmother's ear-piercing shrill screams that ring through the house like a resounding bell. When you hear someone scream like that, you react, as did my brother and I. We unhesitantly bound down the sweeping staircase to my grandmother's side as quickly as we possibly could. She's crouching on her hands and knees at the front door. She's holding a human skull in her hands, studying the rows of teeth. There's one gold tooth in the front of the skull, gleaming brightly in the morning light. My grandmother's eyes grow round as saucers. Her scream spills out of her mouth like a tap on full blast that needs to be turned off very swiftly, or it'll flood the entire house. My brother and I quickly dash to her side. We observe a dirty pile of human bones, very faded and very old-looking, wrapped up in a deer hide, lying there at our front door. Both me and my brother look at each other in horror. Someone had placed the human bones there, possibly as some kind of macabre sick joke. But then I remember the reluctant Bigfoot the previous night, who had placed a bundle at the front door. It would seem he was agonizing in making this decision. Why would he leave the bones here like this, I wonder? My grandmother is crying. "I can't believe this is happening all over again. Will this nightmare ever leave me alone? How can this even be after all these years? How can this still be intact?
Why isn't it gone by now? It's like the bones are revenging me, refusing to decompose from beyond the grave. It's hounded me all my life, and now it's come back to haunt me all over again.
My grandmother's story. My life since the Second World War had been very hard. No one who'd lived through a war can comprehend what it's like, seeing those you love going off to fight in a war that was so pointless in every regard, but also so necessary for the freedom of our people. I think the punishing hurt I felt was self-induced for so many years. I blamed myself for everything that transpired after my husband's death. Many people assumed that I just never got over my husband's death, that I was a grievous widow who hung on to another time, refusing to move on with my own life. But there was so much more to the story than ever met the eye, that nobody knew about. So many secrets hidden for so many years that had to be buried away, like a stash of squirrels' acorns, never to see the light of day. My state of melancholia was reflected in my lifestyle, in the hard, rigid, dark furnishings that surround me, the foreboding artwork I select to literally hang on my walls, mirroring the dark, dilapidated and broken-down state of my heart. I didn't want to surround myself with pretty things. I felt undeserving of all things good, wilfully denied them to myself. Yet all things that were light and airy were a direct contradiction to my burdened heart, so they became almost offensive to me. It was as if the dark sombreness of my home accommodated and complemented my bleak state of mind. I mean, what does a thunderous, stormy, cloudy day have in common with a sunny one? And what does a happy, joyful, ebullient mood have in common with a sorrowful grief? Nothing. Suffice to say, I was carrying some residual anger towards my late husband James, as the inauspicious day when he told me he was never coming back from the war left an indelible, traumatic footprint on my life that has never faded, not even after all these years. I remember those words. They seared through me like a sharp knife gliding through butter. It was as if he'd plunged this weapon in my heart, for I was flooded with an isolated, lonely, rejected feeling, as if my inner world had become an empty wasteland, filled with prickly cactuses, devoid and barren of all life. I felt empty, alone, desolate. Of course I'd pleaded with him not to go on those flying missions, but he was defiant, determined, resolute, and eager to fight for God and country, and for his children's children, which made him an unsung hero. When I received the news of his grievous death, I was actually more emotionally prepared than most. I also knew he wasn't coming back, with the same conviction that he had conveyed to me that day. Was this God's magnanimous way of graciously making the shock more bearable? Possibly. Nevertheless, I found the grief of my husband's absence in my life insufferable. I felt cheated that my children would grow up without him. I was now left to raise my 2 children on my own with my mother, and of course my stony-hearted sister Amber, who shared our very large Greek revival family home together. Regretfully, my beloved, most wonderful father had passed away shortly after I was married to James, from a sudden unexpected heart attack that caused my family a great grievous upset, with of course the exception of my impervious sister Amber, who rode every storm in life like a skilled surfer on an ocean wave, who didn't allow the rocks on the road of life to cause her to stumble in any way. She would have considered herself a brave heart. In truth, I considered her a ruthless soul. My mother had been so kind and encouraging towards me after my husband's fortuitous death, but regretfully my graceless, unmerciful sister Amber was indifferent and actually quite offensive towards me. It was hard to believe that someone could be that cold-hearted, aloof and obdurate as Amber was, when me and my 2 children were going through such intolerable trauma. But Amber was like a cold fish with an iron heart, who even told my kids to get a grip, to stop being such big babies because they were missing their dad. She was one of those people that told you what she thought without a filter. Sometimes her words could sting, as if you'd been stung by a hive of angry hornets. I've never known anyone more indelicate, more insensitive and hard-boiled than she was. She hypothetically possessed the mouth of a piranha, the spikes of a hedgehog. She knew how to ruffle your feathers more than anyone I've ever known. Besides that, I think she enjoyed stirring the pot. She liked upsetting people. My sister was deceptively pretty, with wispy long blonde hair, curtaining her face in curvy Nordic waves, and a perfectly symmetrical face that probably met the golden ratio. She had exquisite definition in high cheekbones, and of course a pert, elegant nose, a flawless pale skin that had never been besieged by an unfriendly pimple a day in her life. Her dewy blue eyes were seductively pretty. They failed to convey her hard heart, but if you looked closely enough, you could see a stark coldness within them, but then you had to look really closely. She had perfect teeth, along with a gold crown on one of them, but it actually wasn't offensive or ugly. It seemed so many young men were ensnared by her honey traps, like lambs being led to the slaughter. But none of my sister's relationships ever last. Her cruel, cold words would leave men running for the hills. And when I say running, I mean they would run. I remember her complaining once that her relationships with men never lasted, and she couldn't understand why. If I had possessed an audacious courage, I would have told her, like my mother did on numerous occasions, to wash out her mouth and remove the spiky prickles from her heart, like the thorny briars on a thorn tree. I think even my parents were subdued in my sister's presence, as let's just say when you're living with someone with a fisherman's spear for a tongue, you naturally become ever so slightly guarded. Growing up, my parents had tried to raise my sister to be kind and softly spoken, but the more they corrected her, the more she rebelled against their well-meaning corrections. It would seem the lion in some people just cannot be tamed, and that was the case with Amber. After James' death, my sister hit me with a barrage of abuse, when I would have appreciated some kind words, some much-needed encouragement. "Get over it, Pearl," she would snipe, so ungraciously, with a hostile, fierce, reprimanding tone of voice. "For goodness sake, how many times do I have to tell you to get a grip? Look at you. You're a mess, a complete mess. James is not coming back, so move on with your life. Stop this mooching around, feeling so sorry for yourself. Besides, there are plenty more fish in the sea. You're pretty. You'll find someone else to replace James. Why cry over spilt milk? There's no point." "How dare you?" I screamed at her. "I don't want anyone else but James. Don't you get that? You're the one with the problem, Amber. You just lack any empathy or emotion. James was the love of my life." "He's the love of your life, is he? Or he was?" she says scathingly. "For your information, sister dear, I shared a bed with your husband in this house before he ever met you. And we had a very romantic evening together, I might say. And then he just slipped out of the house, dumped me like that. When I saw the loser again, I made sure I gave him a large kick in the groin. He had his fun with me, then he spat me out. That's the man you married, a real jerk." "You're lying," I say, the tears pouring down my face. "James never shared your bed. He wouldn't do that." My sister's grinning at me boldly, basking in my distress like a seal sunning itself on a rock. She's pleased with the upset she's caused me, and is lapping up my obvious horror with delight, as if drinking a delicious cocktail. "Wouldn't he?" she says. "Let's just say, sis, he thoroughly enjoyed every minute of me. Couldn't get enough of me." "Well, if he had such a wonderful time with you, sis, then why didn't he come back for more?" I say unkindly. I'm now so angry. A fury consumes me. I'm like a pressure cooker on the boiler that just wants to burst and explode. I lunge towards my sister, grabbing a handful of her blonde hair and pulling hard. She throws me down on the floor. We wrestle each other like two aggressive dogs, pulling each other's hair. But my sister steps up the aggression several notches. She pounds me with her fist so violently hard that my head begins to spin. My body is shooting pain in places I never knew I even had. My sister is stronger than me. I'm begging her to stop. "Amber, please stop, Amber. You're hurting me. Please, Amber. Please, you're hurting me. Please." My sister does not listen. She doesn't care. She continues beating me. The tears spill down my cheeks. But my sister does not slow down. She beats me so badly that, quite frankly, if she'd continued for much longer, she could easily have killed me, without a shadow of a doubt. Let's just say the fight was brutal. I've never had a physical altercation with Amber before, but fighting her invited her to become incredibly aggressive towards me. The next thing I know, my mother has entered the room. She's bewildered and confounded about what is going on. My sister has me pinned beneath her.
Stop that now, Amber! You get your hands off your sister now, do you hear me? You stop right now, girl!
My sister ignores my mother's fierce reprimanding tone of voice with a willful insubordination. She continues to pound me with her fists. Every part of me is literally shrieking in pain, as her violent thrusts literally spasm through my body, like fireworks going off on the 4th of July. My mother can take no more. Her protective, nurturing instincts simply roll into gear. She knows she needs to stop this fight before it's too late. She impulsively employs the first weapon to her disposal, a heavy crystal glass vase, which she throws at my sister so hard that it collides with her head like a missile, and my sister just drops on top of me and is out cold as day. My mother pushes my sister's body off me, throwing her arms around me lovingly.
I thought she was going to kill you. Are you all right, sweetheart?
I've never seen Amber behave like this before.
I don't know what's got into her.
At this point in time, we simply think my sister Amber has been knocked out cold and is unconscious. But when we roll her on her side and try to arouse her, we are met with these hauntingly glazed empty eyes that stare back at us like glass marbles. Me and my mother let out these discomposing screams as we realize the full gravity of what has transpired. Beyond the pandemonium, the sea of shattered glass, my sister's body lies bedraggled, with blood pooling behind her head. In an ocean of chaos, like a dead mermaid, she lies there, with her blonde hair stained red by her own blood.
She's dead, my mother gasps. I've killed your sister.
For a long while, all is still in the living room, as we stare at each other in a stunned silence. Time sweeps past us with no regard for this moment, as minutes glide into hours. I've never been quiet for this long, frozen in time from the sheer incomprehensible shock of what has just happened. My mother is the one to break the silence.
No one can know about this, sweetheart. No one can find out what happened here today.
I nod in agreement.
You could go to prison for life, I say. I mean, even if we told the police it was self-defense, I'm not sure they'd believe us. It's a risk we can't afford to take. No one in town will miss Amber anyway. No one will ask questions. No one will even care. She hasn't got friends. People don't even like her. So if we say she went away, that will be that.
My mother agreed. Later that day, the two of us buried my sister in the woodgrove, but the guilt that hung over our lives was like a huge curtain of regret. My mother never got over the guilt and the sense of horror she felt about the responsibility of taking her own daughter's life so fortuitously. It was not a surprise that 5 years after the event, my mother also died. The autopsy confirmed a heart attack. I know she died from a broken heart. In the same breath, I was also consumed with a guilt and held myself accountable and responsible for what had happened that day. So every single day of my life, I basked in the shadow of my melancholia, and year after year it clung to me like the mussels on an ocean rock. Then one morning, while my 2 grandchildren had moved into my home for a while, I discovered an unfortunate package on the front doorstep, wrapped in a manky-smelling deerskin. When I opened it, I observed the remains of a human body, a degraded corpse. I lifted up the skull in my hand, observing the long row of teeth, and in the far right-hand corner of the jaw was a golden crown that I recognized. This was my sister's tooth. It was Amber's skeleton that had been burrowed up from the grave. I was completely astonished that the bones hadn't crumbled after so many years, as is most commonly the case, and what you would expect. But the soil conditions can sometimes delay composition significantly, which is why sometimes ancient skeletons have been unearthed by archaeologists dating back hundreds of years, it seems. Well, my biggest concern was that someone knew my secret. So I stood there in the doorway. A strange high-pitched scream wafted through the air. I realized it was coming from me. Back to Saskia, Pearl's granddaughter. My grandmother is trembling in the doorway. Her face is as white as a ghost, and this composed woman allows the reserved mask of her emotional security to slip off her face as she stares in horror at the remains that lie on the front doorstep. I lead her lovingly into the kitchen, while me and my brother watch a tsunami of inconsolable tears gush out of her eyes and roll down her cheeks. But I know these tears are way overdue, and that my grandmother needs to cry, like a barren land tortured by no rain for a long period of time, finally greeted by showers of renewed hope that bring life back to this desert wasteland, inviting promise and the dawning of new opportunities. My grandmother's heart is that desert wasteland. Her tears are the rain. They represent new hope, new life. They need to be cried. And me and my brother do nothing to discourage her. We know it's good for her. It's after her tears have fallen, and the aching weeps of her sobs have finally calmed, that my grandmother tells us the story of her sister Amber, and how she knew they were her remains that had been unearthed. She recognized the golden crown on the tooth. Amber had always loved that crown tooth. I reach out to touch my grandmother's arm. "It was an accident," I exclaim. "If you remember, she was attacking you. She didn't stop. She needed to be stopped. You have to forgive yourself for what happened, as the guilt is eating away at your life, like the moths on a Persian carpet." "But someone," says my grandmother, "knows what happened. They dug up Amber's remains. They're trying to punish me." The someone that dug up the remains was a Bigfoot, I tell my grandmother, who looks at me in astonishment. "Are you kidding?" she pipes. "Do you know, all those years ago, when we dug that grave in the Woodgrove, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The following day we went to place some flowers on the gravesite and to conduct a funeral ceremony, and there were some long sticks sticking out of the grave that we didn't put there. It was very odd." "Well, it seemed like the Bigfoot knew your secret," I say to my grandmother. "Maybe he wanted you to deal with the pain, with what you've been living with for so long, to face your grief, to receive some healing." To cut a long story short, my grandmother reburied her sister's remains in the Woodgrove. We had a private ceremony for her sister, laying fresh flowers at the grave. The next day some strange sticks had been placed above the new grave. I had a sneaking suspicion that it was from the Bigfoot. After this event my grandmother's life shifted. The oppressive furnishings were removed from the home. The house was redecorated with lighter fittings and uplifting colours. My grandmother received some professional counselling and lived out the rest of her life in peace. And after her death the bones of her sister were exhumed and buried next to her gravesite. But by then the two people involved in Amber's fortuitous death were dead themselves. All these years later, I believe that Bigfoot could sense my grandmother's pain, so deliberately dug up her sister's bones to enable my grandmother to find healing in facing her grief head-on. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, as a mother working for my own interior design company, I was always exceedingly busy, frantically on the go, meeting the demands of high-profile customers. Life was never easy, but then when is life ever plain sailing? For most of us, we have to rise above the inevitable hiccups that greet us along the way in the journey of life. Let's just say that pleasing some of Philly's most exacting, affluent customers was not a job for the faint-hearted. It required serious grit, nerves of steel, while conquering the telltale signs of a quivering upper lip, as mine has a tendency to betray my disapproval when I'm trying to appear solicitously cooperative, with a benevolent, complacent expression on my face, when secretly I just want to pull out my hair and scream. It would be the little things that would frustrate me the most. The irrational, nonsensical, far-fetched and unreasonable requests of clients, wanting their glass cabinet doors for their kitchens to be filled with exotic fish swimming around in the glass. I mean, are you kidding me? Excuse me, madam, but what the heck are you actually smoking? You think delicate, tropical, colourful sea fish can swim around in your glass cabinets just to look pretty for you, while you cook spaghetti carbonara on your gas hob of your fabulously expensive range oven? I can promise you people ask for the most bizarre, inefficacious and unavailing things that could never ever work. When I put my foot down and say no, I'm always made to feel that I'm objectionable, and the client may actually pout and almost sulk like a spoilt brat that is not getting her way,
and is very aggrieved by the unfairness of my disregard to what they personally consider a riveting suggestion on their parts. I always have to come up with a compromise, a halfway house, a happy medium, so to speak, to soothe away their withered, deflated egos. These are known as my anti-inflammatory suggestions. Well, if you want exotic fish in your kitchen, I will say, why don't we create a pillar of fish by using a very well-designed exotic fish tank? Or we can get pretty designs of fish for you prepared on china plates that can be displayed over your walls, or even embossed and hand-painted on the centre of your wooden cabinetry. Don't get me wrong, I love my job, but it was the self-entitled clients, inflated by their own arrogant egos, their sense of superiority, self-importance, and trappings of wealth, that would actually annoy me the most. You always get the impression that they think they know better than anybody else, because they're rich, and that attitude stinks as far as I'm concerned. Their money does not make them better than other people. Fortunate, yes, privileged most certainly, but better, most certainly not. Recently I'd taken on board my team an ambitious female protégée I hoped would finally fill my shoes one day, so that I could be redeemed from some of the hard work, and be able to spend more time with my family. She had told me that she'd love my job one day, so I hired her at once, as I was looking for people with drive in my business. My young 8-year-old daughter Georgina was currently being taken care of by our live-in Swedish au pair, if that's what you call her. She picked up my daughter from school every day, gave her lunch, helped her with her homework. Let's just say Ebba was not the greatest babysitter, but at least I knew I could trust her to a degree to take care of Georgina. If she could stop for a wee minute, that is, to draw breath and unglue herself from her mobile phone, that dominated her every move, as if she was a battery-operated robot that couldn't function properly without the remote control. In her case, the remote control was her cell phone. When I was at home, I would hear Ebba's intrusive voice jabbering throughout the house like an annoying radio, with nonsensical conversations that actually went like this. "You decide. Oh, no, I can't make my mind up. You make the decision. OK, we'll go there. Why not? What are you going to wear? No, you can't wear that. Remember, I wanted to wear mine. Yes, but last time you wore yours. Don't you remember?" That was how trivial her conversations were, arguing about everything and nothing. In my personal and professional life, my cell phone was used for practical fast conversations and was a means to an end. I used to secretly dream of snatching Ebba's cell phone away from her, throwing it in the trash, as Ebba's entire life revolved around the ridiculous gadget. Although I hasten to say it was advantageous to be able to contact her and know she would answer at once. It seemed piteous to me, but I was determined to keep the peace in our home. So against my own better judgment, I said nothing about the invasiveness of her cell phone. I had come from a residual generation, where cell phones were all becoming a novelty. I knew a time when these gadgets did not conquer or dictate our lives. For me, without the unwanted trespassing interruption of cell phones, life back then had been so much more peaceful. Time was more generous. It wasn't ravenously stolen by the insatiable appetite of modern technology. One day as I was driving through town to visit a client of mine, I get a call from the headmistress of my daughter's school, which certainly rattled my cage. I can see it's her name flashing on caller ID. I know a call from the headmistress is probably not good news. I pull to the side of the road, parking my car. My fingers tremble unsteadily as I answer the call, my thoughts wondering if something bad has happened on the school playground, as Georgina is at school now. All kinds of horrifying thoughts filter through my head. Is she hurt? Did she have a nasty fall? My mind hops like a grasshopper, from one nasty scenario to the next. For as a conscientious mother, you inevitably fear the worst. It's an instinctive maternal reaction to worry about your child. "Hello," I say. "Patricia Fletcher speaking." "Hello, Mrs. Fletcher. This is Belle Schreiner speaking. I would appreciate it if you would consider popping around to the school later, when you have a moment at hand. I'd like to have a word with you concerning your daughter." "What is this about? Is my daughter all right?" "Your daughter's absolutely fine, Mrs. Fletcher. It's her recent behaviour that needs addressing. It's causing me grave concern, I have to say. At this horrifying revelation, my heart naturally misses a beat. What's going on with my daughter? What does Mrs. Schreiner mean by Georgina's recent behaviour? What has she done? I'll be there as soon as possible, Mrs. Schreiner, I say. I immediately cancel my client, tear through town in my black BMW, towards my daughter's school. I have no idea what has happened, but I'm perpetually saddled by a guilty conscience that never ever leaves me. When you're a parent who is consumed and inundated by work, your life is arrested and held hostage to a shameful guilt that cannot be expunged, as it haunts your conscience day after day, pokes you in the ribs, whispers in your ears, "You're a bad mother, a really, really bad mother." I believe my equally as preoccupied husband is afflicted with the same level of regret. Time and time again he has begged me to hand over the reins of my business to a protégé, but reluctantly I've been afraid to do so, afraid of delegating work to someone else that I don't know if I can really trust. I had always known that my absences from my daughter's life would come back to bite me one day. It seems that the moment I've been dreading has inadvertently, uncouthly parked itself in the driveway of my life, and has arrived, like a bright red vehicle, with a sign on its side reading, "Bad parent, bad parent, look what you've done, look what you've done." I know I'm guilty as charged, much like any owner who takes on a highly demanding dog, and not having any time for the animal, so through no fault of its own, the untrained, disobedient dog becomes unruly, disruptive, out of control, badly behaved, and seriously lacking in any social skills. I know over the last few years, me and my equally as busy husband have not spent nearly enough time with our daughter Georgina. Granted, we've had weekends with her, seen her in the late afternoon or early evening, but we're both guilty of parental neglect in this regard. We have unwillingly handed over our daughter's childcare responsibilities to a dithering au pair, who has about as much interest in our daughter as a dog has in a garden salad. If my daughter is acting up and behaving atrociously badly, I know that me and my husband are entirely to blame. We're responsible. Me and my husband have guilefully deceived ourselves over and over again that things would invariably change in the future. But time waits for no one, is no respecter of persons, and has steadily marched on so fast like an army of ants. But still, nothing has changed. Me and my husband are ensnared by the same hectic schedule of our lives, tangled up in its thorny briars, its piercing, disobliging demands, so much so that our unfortunate daughter remains on the back seat, overlooked like a beautiful sunset on the peninsula that has been forgotten about, but worthy of our attention that is never ever received. As two ambitious parents, we hardly ever get to see our little girl, so we bow dutifully to her every demand. And let's not kid, this has pliably moulded our girl into an objectionable spoilt brat. Whatever Georgina wants, Georgina gets. I think pandering to Georgina's every whim has made us feel better about ourselves as parents, as it keeps her happy. It soothes our guilt, like a calming chamomile ointment that reduces inflammation, making everything feel so much better. I believe our daughter knows that she manipulates and wheedles her power over our guilt so masterfully to get whatever she wants out of us with an outrageous success. It is the deepest regret of my life not spending more time with our girl, as usually when I return home after a hectic day running around like a frantic March hare, I always crash out next to my husband on the living room couch, as we share a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon together. If we see Georgina at all, it's so briefly. Most of the time we're home, our daughter is fast asleep in the upstairs bedroom. The most we do is tiptoe into her bedroom, kiss her on the cheeks, while we make the same exhausted, fatigued journey back to our own beds, like flagging flowers in the meadow, just aching to drop. But in the morning, our deflated bodies will energetically rise up again, to embrace the yo-yo rhythmic flow of our lives all over again. But sadly, they always exclude Georgina, well, at least an awful lot. So payback is now hovering above me like a buzzard in the air, waiting to pounce on me at any given moment, to cast her talons into my flesh so I feel every inch of the pain my lack of attention has afflicted on my daughter's life. I don't want to deal with this right now. As I reluctantly drive to my daughter's school,
I feel as if I've been plunged under ice-cold water and am being drowned by my guilt. This is all my fault. I know it in my guts. It hasn't escaped my attention. My daughter has become a precocious whippersnapper of late. What's more is it's getting worse and worse and worse, like a leaking tap that has to be addressed before the pipes finally burst, and then there is a plethora of water damage everywhere. Last Sunday, when me and my husband went to have lunch with friends of ours who live very close to us, in the Overbrook neighbourhood, here in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, the charming couple have a boy who's called Simon, about Georgina's age, who by all accounts was playing happily with Georgina, until Simon came charging into the living room in tears, claiming that Georgina had deliberately broken the wings off his model flying aircraft and pulled his hair on purpose. "Mummy, Georgina broke off its wings off my model aircraft. She wanted to have another go, but she's been flying it 6 times already. I told her it was my turn now, and she got so cross with me she pulled my hair and stuck out her tongue at me. It really hurt, Mummy, it really hurt." "Georgina," my husband's voice had interceded, "is this true? Did you break the wings off Simon's model aircraft? Did you actually pull his hair and stick out your tongue at him? Now I want the truth. I can't abide atrocious behaviour like this. You know that." "He's lying, Daddy. He's making it all up. He was the one who broke off the model aircraft himself. It wasn't me. I never pulled his hair. He's telling lots and lots and lots of porkies just because he wants to get me into trouble, because he just doesn't like me. That's why." "Don't you worry your little head, Simon. I'll buy you a brand new model aircraft. How about that? To replace the one that Georgina broke for you. I'll get you the latest model. I promise." "You promise you'll get me the brand new model?" "I promise, I say, thinking of the quickest, least uncomfortable way to redeem this awkward situation, and to brush over the grim reality of what has just transpired. It was so much better to avoid a problem than to confront it." "That isn't necessary, Julia," Simon's parents both insisted. "I mean, kids will be kids." In that moment, I knew Georgina had broken the wings off the plane, and she had pulled Simon's hair. I just knew it in every fibre of my being, and so did both Simon's parents. I could see it in their eyes. They were clandestinely fringing their appalled shock, while their mouths seemed to be sewn together with an invisible thread, for they never uttered a single word, overcome with a desire to remain steadfastly polite. Yet just like everything else concerning the chaos caused by my daughter, I brushed it under the carpet, pretended it wasn't there. I should have made my daughter take responsibility for what she'd done, get her to buy Simon a new aircraft herself, out of her own pocket money, like any responsible parent would have done. I should have laid down boundaries for her, ground rules or punishments for my child. And as for pulling Simon's hair and sticking out her tongue at him, I had no clue about how to reprimand her for that. As I near my daughter's school, I park my shining black BMW under the shade of a large, mature, very majestic oak tree that serenades one side of the school's black wrought iron gates that have been left wide open. It has magnanimously carpeted its glorious golden confetti ubiquitously all over the sidewalk. I plunge my head onto the steering wheel and audibly groan. My jerking gesture causes the hooter to go off spontaneously. "What have you done, Georgina, this time?" I say through gritted, clenched teeth. I can feel an indignant frustration shooting through me, like fireworks spitting up in the heavens. I'm angry with Georgina, but much more angry with myself. Finally, I take in a deep breath, apply some red lipstick on in the visor mirror. I then straighten my electric blue jacket and accompanying slitted skirt that is elegantly pleated in the front. I climb out of my car, releasing my shoes from the gripping entanglement of my safety belt. Even my own car is giving me a hard time this morning, I decide. I totter in a pair of impractical high-heeled shoes that clippity-clop across the tarmac like a horse's hooves. I'm on my way towards the headmistress's office, and I'm feeling nauseously sick to the stomach. I walk across the flagstone of the corridor, through a foyer, towards a white brick building, where rambling red and pink roses tumble over the walls like laughter. The school seems so quiet, as classes are contained behind doors and are actively in progress this morning. There's not a sound in sight. Another oak tree with gnarled roots that juts out of the ground hovers over one side of the headmistress's office, while pretty speckled beams of sunlight dance gaily over the verdant turf. I walk over this grass, my high heels gripped by its soft sponginess. I amble unenthusiastically over to the head's office, rather like a lamb to the slaughter, with withering ears that long to be deaf to the ramblings of a headmistress. Mrs. Schreiner's office is accessed by a small flight of stairs that lead up to a wraparound porch and finally to a glossy pale blue door, with a golden plaque pinned on the front reading Belle Schreiner's office. I knock on the door cautiously. Mrs. Schreiner opens the door and beckons me in. I gather at one time she ran a very strict girls' private school in England, until she emigrated here to America. She is, I hasten to say, one of the most intimidating women I have ever had the pleasure to meet. The kind of woman that can equally make the parents feel as if they're in serious need of reprimanding themselves. In my mind's eye, I can visualize her telling me to bend over while she raps my derriere with a leather belt for being a very naughty little girl. "Hello, my dear," she says to me in her posh English accent. "Thank you so much for coming. Please take a seat, won't you?" Nervously I oblige her request and sit in the chair directly opposite her, on the wide-panelled, gleaming oakwood desk, where everything has its precise placement. Mrs. Belle Schreiner walks with such a straight, graceful deportment, is always wearing tweed pencil skirts that skim above her ankles, smart jackets, elegant blouses, and pearls. I think she's in her late 60s, although she looks significantly younger. Her flawless English complexion has kindly remained unlined in her advancing years, without the aid of Botox or fillers. I know this as she can easily furrow her forehead and doesn't have the mask-like look you can get from overdoing the Botox. I see this look among many of my rich clients who leave no area of their skin uninjected, and let's just say, with Botox, less is definitely more. Many would kill to have a skin like Mrs. Schreiner's, but I imagine she has not exploited her skin to the sun. The silken curtains of her thick dark hair are pulled away from her face, in a formidable beehive-like bun. Her silvery grey eyes look directly into mine. I want to escape her direct gaze and look away, but I can't. It's like she's held my gaze. "Mrs. Fletcher," she tells me, "I'm not going to beat around the bush. I mean, why would I do that to you? But your little girl, Georgina, has become an obnoxious little brat, and a real bully of late." I sit there squeezing and compressing my fingers together tightly so that they actually click. What do I say to this? How do I defend my daughter's behaviour? That would be an instinctive, natural reaction for a mother to do, would it not? But the headmistress is making me face the sober truth, like an owner dragging its dog over to its vomit, rubbing its nose in the gruesome offence. I don't know what to say, Mrs. Schreiner. What happened? What exactly did Georgina do?" "Mrs. Fletcher, I do wish I could tell you what you want to hear, but I have to be straight and to the point with you. I have a very strict approach, and I believe in establishing boundaries in our children while they're very young. Your daughter is like an untamed wild child that does the hell what she likes and has no accountability for any of her actions. I'm grossly appalled by the sense of entitlement that she has adopted, as if in some way even the teachers here should be bowing down to her, as if she's a princess." "I agree," I almost whimper. "I have noticed her becoming noxiously insufferable recently. You ask me, Mrs. Fletcher, what your daughter has done. I would actually change that question radically to say, what has she not actually done? Your daughter has got herself caught up into open scraps in the playground with other girls, and from what I've heard, she's instigated all these fights herself. Let's just say she's been mean, very spiteful, and incredibly unkind." I cup my hands over my mouth. I gasp. "You're joking? You mean she's physically actually hurting people?" "Not just that, Mrs. Fletcher.
Your daughter is afflicted with a very big case of the green-eyed monster. The likes of such I have never seen before in my school. The other day in class, little Marjorie Cunningham had painted a picture in art that was highly praised by the teacher, who showed it off to the rest of the class. Your daughter was seen scribbling over the painting with black crayon. She was furiously jealous about the compliments that Marjorie received from the teacher. Now, Mrs. Fletcher, I do hold you accountable, you and your husband, for your daughter's insubordinate behaviour. You see, over the years as a headmistress, I have discovered it is bad parenting that enables kids like Georgina to act out so abysmally, which means later on in life she's going to grow up to become quite a little madam. Mrs. Schreiner, I take offence to you laying the blame at my door like this, I say, stumbling on my words. Mrs. Fletcher, as a headmistress, I have your daughter's best interests at heart. I have no intention of insulting or offending you. But if you want Georgina to change her behaviour, you have to change your parenting skills. Even you must surely see that she's out of control. I mean, scribbling over a kid's artwork is reprehensible behaviour that I simply cannot abide in my school. I have taken the liberty and the initiative of talking to your daughter about her family life. I have observed she's ravenously hungry for attention and will stop at nothing to get it. I do understand, Mrs. Fletcher. Believe me, I do. I'm on your side. I dare say you're not the first and won't be the last working parent that is faced with the challenges of raising a very difficult, demanding child. It's so much easier to give in to a difficult child and throw money at the problem in the hope that it'll all go away. But you do realise that that is not the solution to this problem. Is there any way in your high-pressure job you can free up some special time to spend with your child? I feel this is terribly important. You won't know what your child's issues actually are without seeing them firsthand, and thereby laying down the appropriate boundaries for her, enforcing discipline in a gentle, instructive, kind way that serves your daughter's very best interests. Actually, I'm trying to do that, but it's not easy. I've got a young woman, a protégée, I recently recruited in my business, who I believe will eventually fill my shoes, so I have more time on my hands to devote to raising my daughter. Well, in the meantime, I have the perfect solution for you, Miss Fletcher. A very good friend of mine has 8 children in her family, all homeschooled, living on a farm, where they have learnt to share everything. The children are remarkably well behaved. I feel the influences of Georgina living with a family like that for 8 weeks will serve her best interests. The 2 young siblings, Donovan and Sally, are round about her age. It's a little like putting an unruly dog among a team of very well-behaved dogs. You'll be surprised how the other dogs recognise the antisocial behaviour and nip it in the bud. They put the dog firmly in its place. The new dog soon changes and learns to adjust. I believe the children in this family, along with the parents, will help to change your daughter, transform her into a better version of herself. She will learn by their example. At first it will be uncomfortable for your daughter, like a piece of marble being chipped and chipped at until it becomes a fine piece of sculpture. The road might be bumpy and precarious for her, but she will be changed so positively. It'll be a move that you cannot regret. It sounds like a great idea, I say, relief flooding over me. Do you think it'll actually work on my daughter? Mrs. Schreiner reaches out to squeeze my arm kindly. I realise in that moment she really did have my best interests at heart. I think we should have a jolly good shot at it, don't you? I've spoken to the family, and they're more than delighted to invite your daughter to stay with them for the next 8 weeks. Are you on board with this decision? Absolutely. Where do they live? They live in Jasper. It's 50 miles from Atlanta, located in Pickens County, at the northern end of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Let's just say your daughter will be staying in a very prepossessing environment, with lots of fresh air, beautiful countryside, where she can run around with the other children. Let's just say Jasper boasts incredible features. Alberta's tallest mountain, for example. Malign Lake, which is the 2nd largest glacier lake in the entire world. The wildlife there is so diverse,
You name it, they've got it. From grizzlies to black bears, mountain goats, wolverines, elk, bighorn sheep. Can I come along too, I tease? It sounds absolutely wonderful. How far is it from Pittsburgh, Philly? I ask. 12 hours by car, about an hour and 45 minutes in the plane. It hadn't been difficult to persuade my husband to allow Georgina to be whisked off to Jasper, to stay with a family that could help subdue the very contrary side of her character. I was the privileged one that escorted my daughter by plane to the McDougalls farmhouse, and what a house it was too. A stunning white symmetrical building, with a grey slate roof, large French windows overlooking prepossessing views of the countryside. Let's just say its wholesome simplicity was beguiling, while a long neat asphalt road plundered towards the farmhouse in a long vertical sweep. On the right-hand side of the road was a large triangle of land that was pristinely cultivated in horizontal and vertical squares, all that were aligned with vigorously healthy watermelon crops. Then fringing the whole farm every side were trees, and still more trees, clustered together in ubiquitous congenial groups, namely sweet gum, eastern red cedars, and red budwood trees, all very similar in size, stature, and its viridescent leafy bounty. Let's just say the bright twinkling greenness of the countryside was very alluring under the canopy of a cobalt blue sky. There were no early signs of autumn here. It didn't appear to have seized this part of the country yet. I told the taxi driver to wait for me, while I gathered my daughter's suitcase from the trunk, and proceeded to march her to the front door. I was actually looking clandestinely forward to being released of the burden of my daughter for 8 long weeks. She had become so difficult of late. I felt almost guilty to be lumbering her off to some perfect strangers who were going to have to deal with her tantrums. Now remember, Georgina, I want you to behave yourself. I need you to be a very good girl and to be on your best behaviour. Do you understand? These very kind people are taking care of you for the next 8 weeks. I do need you to be a good girl. Do you understand what Mummy is trying to tell you? My daughter wilfully ignores me. She throws a tantrum, accompanied by a hissy fit, kicking her white-stockinged feet on the ground indignantly. I don't want to come here. I want to go home now. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be with strange people. Take me home now, Mummy. I want you to take me home. I don't want to be here. Don't speak to me in that tone, Georgina. You're staying here because your headmistress believes you need to learn to mind your manners. You're going to learn about good behaviour here, how to conduct yourself like a young lady. But I don't want to be here, Mummy. I want to go home now. Ava McDougal's account. I'm the oldest daughter in the McDougal family. I'm 16 years old. I've been told I bear a striking resemblance to the fictional character of Mary Poppins. I don't know whether to take that as a compliment or not. But then I am told she was a vibrant personality. I'm much the same, as nothing ever gets me down. I have an upbeat attitude. I will confess I smelt trouble brewing the moment the mollycoddled nanny Georgina Fletcher arrived on the doorstep of our lives, like a gale-force southerly wind that didn't cut much slack. She was a precocious spoilt brat, with a face seared by a scowl so deep it was almost humourful, but very incongruous to a cherub-like angelic face that she possessed, framed by a buoyant curtain of blonde wispy curls that bounced with a frenzied fury whenever she moved. It was incredulous that such a peaked face was dappled by 2 of the cutest dimples that I've ever seen, with bejewelled lapis lazuli eyes that twinkled brightly with a pugnacious indignance. I was soon to learn, when that little girl did manage a smile, she could quite literally light up a room like the sunshine. But smiles from this capricious little Georgina were few and far between. I could see this girl was as temperamental as the weather, who could blow hot and cold at a moment's notice, and that with her living under our roof, there were going to be some stormy days ahead of us. Georgina began to have a dramatic tantrum when her mother kissed her goodbye on the cheeks and returned to the taxi. She was bawling her eyes out, howling, stamping her feet belligerently on the wooden oakwood floors of our farmhouse that echoed under her indignant wrath. I knew this young, pampered, overindulged child was going to require work, and lots of it. I was so eager to fix her. I think every member of my household, most especially my parents, desperately wanted to help tame this obstreperous, unruly wild child that was like a delinquent feral cat, with claws so sharp they could scratch you viciously if you weren't very careful, and a tongue as spiky as a hedge of briars or a cantankerous hedge of thistles. My mother had welcomed Georgina warmly, given her a hug, but the affronted, incorrigible child had wilfully pushed her away, so that she almost fell over on her feet, as if the physical affection was somewhat uncomfortable for her. No sooner had Georgina settled in, she became provocatively insolent, rude, discourteous, especially at family meal times, where we sat around the long wooden table in our rustic kitchen, where we were passing around serving dishes of roast potatoes, cauliflower cheese, roast chicken and gravy. Georgina glances down at her plate disapprovingly, with an expression of abject horror on her face, as if the delicious home-cooked food plated before her, prepared so lovingly by my domesticated mother, is absolutely revolting, and does not meet with the exacting standards found on a menu of takeaways.
I want pizza! I don't want this! I don't like this! I want pizza! Order me pizza now! This food is yucky! I don't like yucky food! I can't eat this! I can't eat this! She says, thumping her knife and fork on the table like an uncongenial drum roll, as she pushes her plate away objectionably. Why can't you eat this, dear? My mother asks her. I'll have you know it's absolutely delicious. I prepared it for everyone this evening for dinner. The roast chicken is tender and succulent, the potatoes crisp. I get them like this because I cook them in goose fat. They're better than fried chips, I can promise you that. It's delicious, Mum, we all chorus together. But I want pizza! I don't want this, says Georgina. I want pizza! I don't want this! At home my mother always lets me have whatever I want. I don't like this food. My mum's nice. She's not like you. We all eat the same food in our household, Georgina, pipes my mother. We don't stand on ceremony here. We don't go ordering people takeaways. There's no special treatment in our house, Georgina. I want pizza! I want pizza! Says Georgina, her eyes filling with crocodile tears. To our horror, she reaches out to the potatoes and chicken on her plate and revengefully squishes them together in her hands like Play-Doh and throws a congealed mush directly at my mother that misses her by a hair's breadth. Peggy enthusiastically dashes over with delight as the globules of mush have exploded everywhere. The kitchen is beginning to look like a Jackson Pollock painting, well, the floor anyway. Peggy, realizing that chicken is raining from heaven quite literally, hardly daring to believe her good fortune, charges over eagerly to the carnage, hoovering everything up, licking the floor clean so it shines under the aftermath of her fastidious pink tongue. A silence ensues around the table as Georgina continues to squish the food on her plate and throwing it across the kitchen like darts against a dartboard, where it meets an eager reception from good old Peggy, who never lets us down. Both my parents never react. They don't react at all. They ignore Georgina. They know she's seeking attention. All you can hear is the sounds of our knives and forks clinking against the china, as we eat in silence, while knocking back glasses of homemade lemonade. Georgina's face has grown her fuchsia colour. She is puffed up with indignation, as if she wants to explode in a rage. She's a self-entitled little madam, very frustrated not to get her way. It's clear that to calm the turbulent storms back home in Philly, Georgina's parents have never dared say no to this child, but have wrapped her in cotton wool. Peggy, on seeing food flung across the floor, realizes it's come from our new guest. So she parks herself against Georgina's feet like a comfortable footrest, deciding this might be a good idea, as this human food machine that tosses food over the floor is now her new best friend. I'm hungry, says Georgina, as me and my brother remove the dishes from the table and quickly stack them in the dishwasher. I'm sorry, dear, says my mother. If you didn't want to eat your dinner, then of course you're going to be hungry, aren't you? But that's not my problem, is it? Georgina looks very upset. Her eyes brighten when my mother brings a huge bowl of chocolate pudding to the table. My mother sits at the head of the table, asking everybody how much pudding they each want. She ladles it generously into pudding bowls. "Normal size," says all the kids. "Not too much for me," I say. My mother doesn't ask Georgina how much chocolate pudding she will be wanting. We know she's not getting any, as she refused to eat her dinner. But Georgina does not know this. "I want lots and lots of chocolate pudding," she announces. But the bowls are only parked in front of all 10 members of my family. My 5 brothers, 3 sisters, my mum and dad. Georgina is looking at my mother with an open mouth that is so wide it could almost catch mosquitoes. "Where's my chocolate pudding? Where's mine?" she cries out. What's going on? Why is there no pudding for me?" "Oh, didn't you know, dear?" said my mother calmly. "You don't get pudding if you don't eat your dinner." "But I want pudding," says Georgina, thumping the table angrily with her spoon. "I want pudding! I want pudding!" My 8-year-old brother Donovan turns around and pipes, "Well, you should have eaten your food, silly. Then you could have had some pudding, but you're not getting any now." At this, Georgina grabs Donovan's bowl of chocolate pudding, snatching it away from him fiercely, gobbling it up as quickly as she can, before anyone can do anything to stop her. She licks the bowl clean with her tongue, and stares at our shocked family in glee, as if to say, "I'm the one that got the last laugh here." "That's my pudding," says Donovan. "Give it back." But of course it was too late. Georgina had eaten it so fast, there was no stopping her. As the days passed, little Georgina became more and more obnoxious, complaining bitterly that she wanted to go home, that she loathed our farm. She hated my mother and dad, and my siblings. Georgina was forever pulling Donovan's hair, throwing toys at him, threatening to leave our home at every opportunity. "I'm going to leave this horrible place. I'm going back to Philly," she tells us over dinner every night. "I'm going to walk home." "Sweetheart," says my mother, "it's 12 hours in the car getting back to your home in Philly. It'll take you a long time to get home. You're stuck with us, I'm afraid. But look on the bright side, Georgina. You've only got 7 more weeks left with us, and then you can go home." "You mean we have to have Georgina living with us for another 7 weeks?" says Donovan, looking appalled. "She keeps pulling my hair, Mum, trampling my toys. She's broken so many of them." "Is this true, Georgina? Have you been trampling Donovan's toys?" "He's lying. He's always lying," spouts Georgina, sticking out her tongue at Donovan. "He just wants me to get into trouble. That's his problem. He's not a nice person." Georgina's account. Over the years, I've spoken to many people who have absolutely no memory, or very little, that is, of being 8 years old. They might occasionally get a fleeting recollection of the school they attended, but most of their recall over that period of time is almost lost upon them, as it happened a long time ago. But not for me. Well, to be fair, most of my youth is indeterminate, rather obscure, hazy and vague. But not this time of my life, that's for sure. I remember going to stay at the McDougalls as if it were yesterday, with a crystal clear clarity. I don't recall a time in my life I felt more angry, insulted and offended. I can remember everything about the home, from the exquisite views of the countryside to the smell of leather and tack in the house, along with lavender-scented furniture polish, homemade bread, cinnamon buns and freshly baked cakes. I was enraged to have been dumped on a family that I didn't even know from a bar of soap. How could my parents betray me like this? Abandon me to live with 10 strangers who lived out in the sticks, were homeschooled under the strict supervision of their mother, whom had been a junior high school teacher at one point in her life. I sneakily suspected that she was not going to be a piece of candy to get my sticky fingers around. In my limited experiences, teachers were all the same, formidable, bossy, dictatorial. My parents had sent me here due to an overreaction on their parts, provoked by the nudge of a very well-meaning headmistress, Mrs. Bell Schreiner, who had taken a very dim view of my behaviour. I had been summoned to her offices on numerous occasions, accused of pulling people's hair, calling a girl in the school playground railway tracks, due to the braces she wore on her teeth, that I'm sorry looked like railway tracks. I also told the boy in my class that if Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer could see what a nerd he was, they'd tie him up in the forest and leave him there for the wolves to eat. This didn't go down well with him, and the tattletale, of course, went howling over to the teachers, told them I'd said I was going to tie him up in the forest so the wolves would eat him up. It's amazing how things can so easily be taken out of context. Needless to say, the chagrined headmistress had rapped her fists on the table, actually shouted at me. "My dear girl, I will not abide bullying in my school. Do you understand that?" I had humoured her with a cursory nod and a polite, "Yes, Mrs. Schreiner. If there are any more shenanigans from you, Miss Georgina, I will be forced to call your parents." Of course, I thought she was pulling my leg. She was never going to call my parents. But she did. When our teacher, Mrs. Huggett at school, was oohing and eyeing over Marjorie Cunningham's painting in front of the class, as if it was a wonderful, exemplary piece of art. It wasn't even that good a picture. I knew our teacher favoured Marjorie. She always had, and she always would. She looked at my painting with such a scant disregard. So to extract my revenge, I drew over Marjorie's painting, which was the nail in the coffin for me. I was immediately ushered to Mrs. Schreiner's office to explain myself. "Why? Why on earth would you draw over Marjorie's painting?" she asked me, with an infuriated tone of voice. "'Cause the teacher likes her best," I explained. My comments went down with Mrs. Schreiner like a lead balloon. The next thing I know, my mother is wheedled in by the headmistress to hear about my abysmal conduct and shameful behaviour. My mother told me that she loved me, but she didn't like what I was becoming, a spoilt, selfish little brat. She blamed herself for my behaviour. She hadn't spent enough time with me, and had given in to my every whim, instead of laying down boundaries for me. She assures me that things are going to change very soon around here, as she's handing over the reins of her business to a lady she recently recruited. So the good news is, sweetheart, when you return from the McDougalls, I'll be able to spend a lot more time with you, she announces proudly. My mother and father had told me I was staying at the McDougalls to learn some manners. In truth, I was angry with everyone. Angry with the headmistress of my school, angry with my parents, angry with the McDougalls. It was like they were in conspiracy against me. I didn't want to be here. Most of all, I couldn't stand goody little two-shoes Donovan, who was my age, was always winding me up by being so perfectly well behaved, always sucking up to his mum and dad, doing whatever he was told. He made his bed religiously every morning, polished his shoes, helped his mum in laying the table at night. I would pull his hair, break some of his toys to get my revenge. It felt good to see him become aggrieved. His face would grow ashen as he picked up the broken toy with a sombre expression. He would say, "Why would you be so mean? Why are you always so mean? What is wrong with you?" He said this incredulously, as if my behaviour was impossible to comprehend. It gave me a sense of macabre satisfaction to ruffle his feathers. I thoroughly enjoyed irking him. But I will say this, he was no crybaby, nor did he sulk or brood or even tell on me, like other kids normally did. I suppose it gave me a sense of power to get out some of my grievances on him. In a home where I'd become powerless, as I couldn't manipulate the people in this household like I had done so successfully at home with my mother and dad. The McDougalls were not pliable like my own parents. They were resolutely set in their ways in regard to how they raised their children. Suffice to say, Donovan told me that I wasn't a nice girl, that girls were supposed to be made of sugar and spice, everything that's nice. But I was made of snips and snails and puppy dogs' tails, and was the nastiest girl in the entire world, and he couldn't wait for me to go back home, and the sooner the better. And he hoped after that he'd never ever get to see me again as long as he lived. "I'm going home," I told him, "sooner than you know. Even if I have to walk there, I'm going." "You'll never do it," he said. "It's too far." It must have been about 12 o'clock at night when I climbed cautiously out of bed, on a night after having braved a whole week of living under the McDougalls' roof. And I couldn't take it a moment longer. I had to leave this god-awful place full of horrible rules. I wanted to return back home to Philly. I shared a bedroom with the McDougalls' 8-year-old daughter, Sally, whom had avoided me rather like the plague since I arrived. Donovan told me she was scared of me. "No one likes you," he he said spitefully. "No one likes slits and snails or puppy dogs' tails, and that's what you are, Georgina. You're not even a girl." Thankfully, Sally was fast asleep and didn't hear me tiptoeing around. I found a small carrier plastic bag to fling in a few of my clothes, along with a torch in the downstairs pantry. I was small and slight, so I easily squeezed and wiggled my body through the downstairs window. Peggy the dog was barking furiously, wagging her tail profusely. That dog was the only member of the McDougalls household that actually liked me. I had seen the clandestine stolen glances over the dinner table over the last few days, as the family acted so appalled simply because I didn't want a roast dinner. I liked fish fingers and chips, pizza, burger, spaghetti bolognese, Chinese takeaways, but I didn't like the McDougalls' homemade food. Well, not at first, but a few days in, I had secretly changed my mind, secretly deciding that the food wasn't half so bad. One thing, though, that hadn't changed was I desperately wanted to go home, and if I had to walk back home to Philly, then so be it. In my childlike, illogical, irrational reasoning, I really thought that finding my way home would be pretty straightforward. I mean, how hard could it actually be? I could walk through the woodgrove, follow the trees, and was sure I'd find my way back to Philly. Donovan had told me there was a road beyond the woodgrove, a shortcut that he said led to the main highway. I was now outside the window of the downstairs living room, wearing my jeans and a sweatshirt. A cold wind punnelled against my body, its nipping bites nudging my skin like a ghostly breath. For a fleeting second, I had faint misgivings. I was seized with a slight reservation about this journey. But for some reason I knew I'd find my way back home, much like my uncle's homing pigeons. He always told me that their inner compass mechanisms enable them to find their way back, so why should it be any different for me? As incongruous and implausible as it may sound to the cynical of heart and the doubting of mind, I could taste, feel and smell that night all those years ago as an 8-year-old girl, almost as if it happened just yesterday. It was a dark, intimidating night, but I didn't care. I was supercharged with a resolute, dogged determination to get out of here. Stuff the McDougalls and all their stupid, pathetic rules. Stuff Donovan and his mean snipes. Stuff the oldest daughter, Ava McDougal, who was always bossing me around, putting me firmly in my place. She rather reminded me of a black raven, sitting there on a picket fence, staring at you through dark eyes. I never knew what she was thinking, but I knew she thought I needed fixing up, and believed she was the one to do it, to nip me into shape so that I would return home to Philly, the perfect, loving daughter that everyone wanted me to become. Good luck to her. My all-pervading desire to leave the farmhouse was unquenchable. Of course, I was afraid of the dark, but I refused to be discouraged. My haughty pride propelled me ever forward on my intrepid adventure. I would be like my all-time favourite fictional hero, Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. Stories my father read me regularly over the weekends. I loved those boys. I knew the valiant, daredevil, audacious boys like Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer would never be afraid or intimidated by the dark. They would think you were a complete wuss or a silly little crybaby if you cowered over a wee bit of twilight. I was tough, plucky and daredevil, as they were, as good as any boy, braver than most. If I left the McDougalls' property during the day, someone would likely call a halt to my plans. That couldn't happen. The rules would put me in my place. Stupid rules like never being allowed pudding unless I ate my vegetables. I mean, how pathetic is that? Back at home in Philly, I could have whatever I wanted. My parents never said no to me. I had power over them that I lacked here in the McDougal household. Mr. and Mrs. McDougal were stiff, hard and unyielding, like a redwood tree. They couldn't be bribed, manipulated or persuaded to change their minds about anything. Mr. and Mrs. McDougal never raised their voices to me, but they willfully ignored me when my behaviour displeased them, and that would make me as mad as hell. It infuriated me. I hated being disregarded with such a passion. They refused to listen to me when I had a hissy fit, and always made me apologise to Donovan for pulling his hair, or smashing or breaking up his toys. I hated apologising to Donovan. He had that smug, self-satisfied look on his face when I said, "I'm sorry, Donovan. Sorry for pulling your hair. I'm sorry for smashing your toy truck."
I knew if I didn't apologize, I would be excluded from dinner, and that couldn't happen. In the beginning, I absolutely loathed the meals, but begrudgingly I ate them. There was nothing else to eat, and I was always starving hungry. Something about the fresh air and the outside exercise here in Jasper increased my appetite significantly, inviting unwelcome hunger pangs to entertain me every mealtime. Of course, I pretended to hate the food. I'd fiddle around with my knife and fork, act like I was absolutely loathing every mouthful, but I began to enjoy it. I'd never give Mrs. McDougal the gleeful satisfaction or good pleasure of knowing that, of course. I wanted her to falsely believe that it was torturous to eat her food, so I would deliberately pull faces as I ate, as if every mouthful that I consumed that travelled down my gut was too dreadful for words. She would watch me as I ate, and I could see it upset her that I seemed to loathe her cooking. I could be quite the actress when the need arose, but it was a bit unfortunate that I couldn't have seconds. If I dared ask for more, it would mean I approved of Mrs. McDougal's food, and I didn't want to indulge her with any credit. I wanted her to know that I hated every single minute I spent in her house, eating her food, living with her goody-two-shoes pathetic family. It is curiously amazing how your pertinacious, uncompromising determination can almost certainly help you plough through adversity, like an obstinate bulldozer on a landfill site. I didn't care how dark this forest was, and when I did care, I fiercely reprimanded myself, reminding myself stubbornly of Huck Finn's unfaltering stoicism. I could hear him saying to me in my head, "I told you, Georgina, you're a silly little girl. I knew you couldn't do it." I would grimace. My tenacious, indomitable resolve would propel my lumbering feet ever forward through the woods, while flickering pictures of my home back in Philly would teasingly flash into my mind, reminding me of why I was running away in the first place from the McDougalls. My feet trundled cumbrously across the ground, snapping leaf litter and broken branches. I'd been carrying some clothes in a plastic carrier bag, but the bag had snapped and broken. My clothes had spilled out of the hole inside, and they dropped precariously around the forest. I couldn't go back to recover them all, as I'd been zigzagging through the forest anyway, and they could be absolutely anywhere. Besides, I'd given up actually caring about such mundane, inefficacious practicalities. I had an entire wardrobe of clothes back home at Philly. Losing a few would hardly be a train smash. The trees in the woodgrove were swinging in the darkness, their leafy boughs jiggling backwards and forwards. It was a menacing, bodeful wind that seemed to whistle through the trees, as if the whole forest was wailing. It was a ghostly, disquieting sound, which was rather unnerving, but I knew it was only the wind. It wasn't as dark as it could have been, as soft shafts of moonlight hungrily penetrated the branches, puddling the floor generously in an ethereal light. Sometimes I heard the hoot of an owl, the whisking flap of wings flying above my head, the strange howls in the distance that may have come from coyotes or wolverines. I wasn't actually sure. After a while I became fatigued, rather tired. I had no idea how long I'd been walking for, but it felt like forever, and I still hadn't reached that road. My body was aching all over. I was out of breath, and tiredness seized my body like a commanding foe, so that my body easily buckled beneath me, rather like a folding camping chair. I surrendered to its powerful persuasive influences. I sat under a tree for a moment, just for a brief respite. Well, so I thought. I drifted off into a deep sleep, but I suddenly awoke with a start. At first I couldn't comprehend where I was. I felt somewhat disorientated, rather confused, and that was when I remembered what I was doing here. Of course, I was trying to escape from the McDougalls, to find the road that would lead me safely back home to Philly. I was in the woodgrove. I'm sure I must have slept for a couple of hours, possibly more, and it was rather a long break. I could hear a rustling sound and see figures low on the ground, crawling along, resembling dogs, stealthily moving ever forwards towards me, through the ground cover. And then I see a dozen pairs of yellow eyes peering at me curiously through the trees. Then they move purposely closer and closer and closer. In that moment I am seized with an alarming terror, a great trepidation, as one by one These intransigent creatures circle around me. I know they're coyotes. They hem me in from every side. One mulishly braver and spunkier than the others, who's only a hair's breadth away from me, his lips folded back to expose canine teeth. I think he was about to yank his sharp teeth in my flesh to start the frenzied attack. I quickly switch on my torch to shine it directly in the creature's eyes, which seemed to distract them all for a while, as they stepped backwards warily, a brief reluctance hovering over them. But then when they got used to the light and sensed my vulnerability, they were game for an easy meal, and I was that easy meal. The cocky coyote moved ever closer to me once again, more determined than ever to take a large chunk out of me. They would bide their time if need be. These creatures have patience. They're clever. I oscillate my arms frantically. "Stop that! Go away! Stop that!" I kept saying. I was kicking the ground with my boots, thrashing around, trying to make noises to put them off, but it wasn't working. These tenacious coyotes were not easily put off and seemed fully aware of the games I was playing. They weren't fooled. By all accounts, they knew I'd be light work to take down, very easy. In no time at all, they'd be feasting on me. It's like I'd been presented before them on a dinner platter as very easy pickings. I knew that I was powerless against these creatures. Right now, I would have given anything to be sleeping safely under the McDougalls' roof. Suddenly, they didn't seem half so bad at all. Even Donovan seemed more likeable compared to the predatory faces I was seeing now that are drooling for my blood. My eyes fill with tears. I feel helpless. In a trice, one coyote has thrown me to the ground. I don't recall how it happened, but he is joined by a couple of his dogged friends, who are now crawling over me. I remember knowing that it was all over for me. I did let out a choking scream that was subdued by a cocktail of fearful emotions. I'm waiting for the teeth to be tearing into my flesh. I know I'm going to have to prepare for a very painful death. All of a sudden I hear a huge scream, unlike anything I've ever heard in my life or since, along with the sound of ponderous feet pounding the ground as they thunder towards me. Some coyotes scatter, while keeping their nervous yellow eyes focused on me, as if watching what is about to unfold. The one that had thrown me to the ground, and was about to thrust its jagged teeth into my skin, is suddenly thrown backwards, with a forceful thrust by a very powerful pair of arms. I hear painful whimpers and yelps, as 3 coyotes hit the ground very hard. But somehow the injured parties manage to rise to their feet. They skulk away into the night, followed by the rest of the coyotes that shoot away as fast as rockets. For whatever has come to my aid has terrified the life out of them. The desire to mess with me has now been eclipsed. The coyotes disappear into the woods, their hearts set now on easier pickings. In that moment, I see her. My torch has fallen out of my hands, but its light, accompanied by the shafts of moonlight, enable me to see her very clearly. She's standing only feet away from me, with a bewildered, confounded, nonplussed expression on her face. I know what she's thinking. What are you doing here? I'm so stunned by this creature. She's built like a giant army tank, easily 7 to 8 foot tall, possibly 700 pounds or more. I'm only 8, but I know this creature is a Bigfoot. I'd seen programs about them before on television, but I thought they were supposed to be vindictively mean, hostile, aggressive. But this creature, she's as gentle as a doe. I know instinctively I'm safe with her. I also know she's going to take care of me. She's very different to the footage I've seen before of other Bigfoots. In my opinion, she's much more human. Her face is feminine, her body Herculean. It's like you could easily put 5 strong men inside her body to make her up. She's as sturdy as a rock, as hardy as a redwood tree, as powerful as a rhino, but so gentle. She's covered in long, dark, flowing hair that sways like the grass moving in the wind. But there's a white patch of hair on her rather like a sheepdog that runs in a vertical, jagged line down her chest, on either side of her small, pert breasts. The creature bends down, encourages me to climb on her shoulders. I don't hesitate. Then I ride on her back. She takes me to a farmer's barn. The place is not familiar to me, But I feel secure being under a roof, hemmed in by bricks and mortar, and not in the wood grove. The Bigfoot prepares a sleeping spot for me, over some hay that she lays down on the ground. She lies down beside me, like a mother dog, watching over her puppies. In the first light of the new morning, she nudges me wide awake, throws me again over her shoulders. This time I'm enjoying the ride, as she glides in the early morning, back through the wood grove, where she found me first, and then we both sit down behind a tree together, and I have the sense she wants me to stay put, as if she's waiting for someone, as if she's expecting something. Ava McDougal. I am awoken in the morning with a sense that something's not right. I was 16 years old at the time, but instinctive possibly because I'd learnt to keep a beady eye on all my brothers and sisters, all my life. It's something I always did naturally. I'm very much like my mother. I have a nurturing side to my personality, and a mother's sense of knowing when something feels strangely off. I climb out of bed and dive into my jeans and a long-sleeved sweatshirt. I race up the sweeping staircase to check my brothers and sisters' bedrooms, silently slipping into each bedroom, rather like a ghost in the night, to be greeted by their soft snores. I breathe a sigh of relief as I see the familiar faces of my beloved siblings denting the pillows with their sleepy heads. The first light of the new morning has sprinkled its reflective illuminations through the clouds, but the sun hasn't asserted its authority yet, nor has it pushed its way assiduously through the sky to dominate the day. Well, not yet. So the early light is subdued. It is when I enter the room where Georgina is supposed to be sleeping opposite my sister Sally that I notice that her bed is rumpled, as if it has been slept in, but it's cold as ice, as if she hasn't been in bed for a long while. Georgina's pyjamas and slippers are flung haphazardly over the floor, in a heaped mess. Was she already up? I wondered. It was so early. What could she possibly be doing right now? I did think that was unusual. Georgina was always the last one to get up out of bed, which she did with a measure of reluctance. A chill runs down my spine. Our family was responsible for taking care of this girl, as obnoxious and untamed as she may be. But despite her wildness, I did have a creeping affection for her. She was growing on me. She was a little feral and difficult, but underneath all the layers, there was a loving child longing to emerge like a butterfly from its cocoon. I had come to the conclusion that her unruly, rude behaviour that she exhibited was attention-seeking. Her parents had clearly not devoted enough time and energy for raising her. There was a large part of me that realised that she was a victim of her own upbringing. I think her parents spoiled her rotten, to make themselves feel better about their otherwise preoccupied, busy lives, which is understandable. As I'm standing there in this room, my sister Sally is lying fast asleep, her blonde hair strewn over the pillow like a mermaid, her eyes tightly shut. I'm haunted over Georgina's idle threats, of which none of us in my family had taken seriously, not even for a moment. But supposing her threats had not been so idle after all. Supposing she had meant every word of what she'd said. Let's not kid, Georgina was a willful, sedulous and spunky child. If any kid was capable of running away, it would almost certainly be Georgina. She was different to other kids. "I'm going to go home," she kept saying. "I'll walk there if I have to. I'm not going to stay here. I hate this place." She had stamped her feet indignantly, thundered off like an angry black cloud in the sky. Of course, we wilfully ignored her. I mean, surely an 8-year-old kid, even one as feisty and truculent as Georgina, would not be brave enough to run away. I'd never met an 8-year-old kid that could be that ballsy, but there are always exceptions to that rule. Georgina was one of those exceptions. Even at 8 years old, I had never encountered anyone like her. She didn't seem to be afraid of things that other girls her age were. She was precociously bright for one so young. She'd prattle on about the adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, characters well above her age, I would imagine. She would say that she was just like them, an indomitable, brave warrior, an intrepid adventurer. At the time I'd been rather charmed by these endearing tales, but now it was all coming back to haunt me. Had Georgina run away? No, surely not. No. I can feel my breath rising up through my chest in a heated, inflamed panic. A dread sweeps over my body, while I taste nausea rising up in the back of my throat. I don't have a good feeling about this, but I daren't wake my parents up. They'd be so grievously upset if something had happened to Georgina. I must find her quickly. I dart around our farm, with our black dog Peggy running behind me, thinking that my fast pace is indicative of a big, wonderful game. She's infected by my hyped, frantic energy, lets out some excited woofs while thumping her tail. I search barns, outbuildings, I run across the field of watermelons, but she's nowhere to be seen. And that's when I see one of Georgina's dresses lying outside the woodgrove. My heart begins to do a flip-flop. It frenziedly attacks my insides. When you're missing an 8-year-old child, you see a dress of hers lying on the ground. I won't tell you about the spinning thoughts that go roller-coasting through your mind, tearing away at your guts, wounding your soul with heaped spoonfuls of trepidation. My biggest fear that drives through my mind like a rocket launching itself through the clouds is that Georgina might have been killed, harmed by a wild animal. I dash frantically through the woodgrove, clouded by an overcast mood. The shimmering light of an early sun trickles through the trees. The sound of the pretty bird song, the trills, warbles and tweets of birds, is poignantly vibrant this morning. The spectacular viridescence of this majestic forest, with its lacy ferns, leafy green ground covers, moss-lined tree trunks, is arrestingly transfixing. But this morning I'm immune to the beauty of this place, if that's at all possible, and the pearly droplets of dew that cling to the leaves of the plants. All I want to do is find Georgina, right now. I feel vacuously empty inside. I discover a trail of Georgina's clothes strewn across the earthen floor of the woods. I realise with relief that she must have been carrying a plastic bag. I discover the plastic bag on the ground. It has a hole on it. That gives me a measure of reassurance. I cry out for Georgina. Georgina! 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 Where are you, Georgina? But Peggy is barking excitedly at something. She's wagging her tail, as if greeting a good friend. That's when I see Georgina. She's standing there, holding the hand of a large female Bigfoot. I am so bewildered, so shocked, that I actually faint. I fall backwards on the ground. This has never happened to me before or since. But I awaken to find this female Bigfoot helping me up onto my feet, looking into my eyes with concern. "Are you all right?" are the words that flood through my mind. Don't be shocked. I am real. Once I've risen to my feet, stumbling under my knees awkwardly, that feel as if they're going to give away from the shock, little Georgina throws herself happily into my arms. She cries. We both hug. The Bigfoot looks incredibly pleased that we have been reunited. It's almost like she was expecting me to come and pick Georgina up. She gives both me and Georgina a friendly tap on the back, then glides away, giving me a brief nod, and then she's gone. For a while I stand there, my tongue almost choked from astonishment, while Georgina tells me that she came so close to being killed by coyotes, but the Bigfoot female had saved her life. "Please don't tell your parents I tried to run away," she begs me. "I won't say anything," I said, "but you mustn't tell them about the Bigfoot we saw." From that day onwards, something shifted within Georgina. She changed from an obnoxious little brat into a delightful child that was fun to have around. Even her own parents assured my family that we had performed miracles on their girl, and the headmistress, Mrs. Schreiner, actually phoned us directly from the school to praise us for Georgina's miraculous transformations. But methinks the credit has a lot to do with a female Bigfoot, as after that night that she ran away, she changed so positively. But coming close to dying makes most people reevaluate their lives, possibly even an 8-year-old girl. 16 years later, Georgina's account. I'm walking past the Bucks County Courthouse here in Philadelphia. I'm strolling around the vertical layout here that crisscrosses several diagonal roads and V-shaped corners that represent West State, West Court and Clinton, Court and Main, and State and Main. There are a plethora of visitors clad in summer clothes here, casually strolling down the sidewalks, lined with brick pavers. Wild trees ablaze with leafy green foliage pencil up through the ground like verdant umbrellas, dappling the landscape prettily in an arresting viridescence that complements the fabulous brickwork of the buildings here. They're Victorian street lamps, large hanging baskets where red geraniums tumble over the sides of planters, in effusive large colourful blossoms. I love walking in this area, peppered with a rich, vibrant history, which is clearly seen in the amazing architecture of the buildings. I'm glad I'm wearing flat shoes today, along with a cool summer's dress. I can tell that it's going to be a scintillating hot day. The sunshine is quite bright this morning, but the mood of this place is ebullient. I think possibly because it's one of the first real days of summer, after a cold winter long behind us. The weather creates that Mediterranean holiday atmosphere that is very infectious. I'm holding a long leather briefcase in my hand, the type an artist might carry for a portfolio. I'm working for my mother's interior design company as a key designer. I'm meeting up with clients to discuss the layout of a new kitchen. The woman's name is Nora Maxwell. She's a stickler for detail, a very demanding client. In truth, I've never met anyone as rigidly stiff and unaccommodating as her. What Nora wants, Nora gets. But I seem to be the only one in our company able to make her more pliable. My mother believes emphatically that had I not stayed with the McDougalls all those years ago and been broken in like a wild horse, I would have become exactly like Nora Maxwell, a feisty, very demanding madam that doesn't respond promisingly to the words no by any manner of means. I know my mother's right. I used to be like her in my temperament, so I know how to reach out to her in the way that others do not. There are lots of eateries around here, and I move towards the bright yellow umbrellas, where the cafe is fringed in wrought iron fences and brick pillars. I can see Nora Maxwell sitting under one of the tables, looking as glamorous as ever, her facial muscles stiffened by so much Botox, so much so that she can barely move her face at all. Her skin is sun-kissed by a fake tan, while her lips shimmer with a bright gloss. Her blonde bobbed hair hangs in curtains above her shoulders, while Gucci glasses shade her eyes. She looks every part the affluent Philly housewife. "Oh, Georgina, dear, it's fabulous to see you. You look marvellous in your summer dress," she says, kissing me on both of my cheeks. "I hope you've got my kitchen designs there. Will you excuse me for a brief moment while I spend a penny? Feel free to order anything that tickles your fancy." "Will do so," I say. The waiter comes over to me. I tell him to bring me a hazelnut latte. I sense someone is staring at me, so I turn around to find myself looking at a young man, very handsome I might add. He's furrowing his brow as he looks at me, as if something is irking him. There is something strangely familiar about him, but I can't quite place him anywhere. I try to look away, but I just can't. He smiles warmly at me and walks over to my table. He is handsome, tall with blonde hair and ocean blue eyes, that I feel myself melting like butter in his presence. "Hello," he says. "I hope you don't consider me very rude. I assure you this is not a lousy chat-up line, but you do look so familiar. Have we met before? My name is Donovan, and you are?" he says pointedly at me. "You're not Donovan McDougal, are you?" I ask. "That's the only Donovan I've ever known. You can't possibly be him, can you?" "I am Donovan McDougal," he says, looking astounded. "And you are?" "Georgina," I say. "I came to stay with your family, Georgina Fletcher, when you were 8 years old. You told me that I was not like sugar and spice like other girls, but like puppy dogs' tails. You said I was the most horrible girl in the entire world, and you hoped you would never ever see me again." "I said that?" he says. "Well, I must confess I'm going to have to eat my words and apologise for what I said back then. I must have been exceedingly short-sighted. I can see I'm going to have to eat my words. I'm very delighted to meet you, Georgina. My sister told me years after you left our home that she had seen a Bigfoot with you all those years ago. Of course, I didn't believe a word of it, but I swore to myself that if I ever saw you again, it would be the very first thing I would ask you. Is it true?" She's not lying. She's telling you the truth. To cut a long story short, me and Donovan have been married now for 10 years. We have 2 children of our own. So let's just say the world can sometimes be a lot smaller than we think. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.